Heavenly Father, today we put on the full armor to protect us against attack. We put on the belt of truth to protect against lies and deception. We put on the breastplate of righteousness to protect our hearts from the temptations. We put the gospel of peace on our feet to walk in your light, peace, and freedom with the Holy Spirit. We rebuke anxious thoughts. We take up your shield of faith for protection to block and destroy all the darts and threats thrown at us by the enemy. We put on the helmet of salvation to cover our minds and thoughts, reminding us that we are children of a mighty King. We are forgiven, set free, saved by the blood of Jesus. We take up the sword of the Spirit, your living word, that has the power to demolish strongholds and is sharper than any double-edged sword. We come to you, Lord, in prayer daily. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Emma.
You're welcome. Now for a quick intro. What's up, you guys? Welcome to The Imagination. I'm your host, Emma, and today I'm honored to introduce you all to child and foster care, religious abuse, child sexual abuse, trafficking, SRA and RA, survivor and whistleblower, campaigner of historical child abuse, founder of S.A.F.E, Seek and Find Everyone, Abuse in Childhood, independent researcher and reporter, and someone I'm honored to call my friend, Dave Sharp. Just after Dave was born, his mother died and he was put into the care of the Catholic Church, where he spent the first 16 years of life. Dave's life in care was nothing short of horrific. He was trafficked all over Scotland, where he would be taken to houses in and around the Glasgow area with priests. He remembers being taken to a garden and placed in a coffin with the lid put on, and stones would be thrown into the lid to simulate a burial. He also remembers being taken to Ireland on several occasions, where he and other boys would be taken to satanic sex parties that included drugging and raping by multiple men. Throughout his childhood and young adult years, Dave would be taken to many different places, and to this day is still experiencing flashbacks and memory recall. Dave often gets contacted by other survivors who have found his story and details and will disclose their own testimonies which corroborate what he remembers. And all of this is just the tip of the iceberg. Dave is joining us over the course of a few podcast episodes to discuss how these horrific topics, which have allowed evil parasites to further exploit survivors, how they have been kept in the dark for so long in Scotland, how so many other survivors besides Dave came forward to the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry with stories of being trafficked all over the UK and Ireland, but were turned away from giving their evidence, and how so many survivors, including Dave, went through hell with the police in Scotland and the inquiry to have their stories heard, but were silenced. These podcast episodes serve as a chance for Dave to talk about how certain people tried everything to silence survivors, and why, over the last 50 years, between 65 and 75% of all people in Scottish prisons were sexually abused as children, many in the care system by clergy, and how coming forward to have their voices heard ruined their lives. The most important thing Dave will be discussing is how it is possible that men and women whose lives have been ruined by child sexual abuse can turn to child abuse charities and organizations, such as the Child Abuse Inquiry, and find that in Scotland, once these people come into your life, they own you and can destroy your life, and how this has impacted the drug deaths and suicides that have scarred Scotland for decades. And everyone is terrified to talk about it. One such survivor we will be reflecting on and referencing throughout the course of Dave's testimony and episodes is former podcast guest Kevin Sutherland, who recently took his own life due to the torment from his own childhood abuse and the neglect from authorities he suffered after his abuse and disclosure that eerily mimics what you will be hearing in Dave's testimony. Dave has suffered immeasurably, not only during the period in his life when he was being abused, but also after he became a public whistleblower. Among the other topics we will be discussing today, satanic ritual abuse is deeply hidden and truly forbidden to talk about in the UK, and Dave will be ripping that Band-Aid off once and for all to shine a light on the darkness that has clearly been hiding in the shadows for decades and decades and generations and generations. Dave's story is horrific, but it's not unique. As you will hear during Dave's testimony, this is a pandemic of epic proportions that is embedded into the very fabric of society where he lives and where we all live. This darkness doesn't stand a chance against Dave, however, because the truth always prevails. It always gets exposed. And because of people like Dave, we are going to learn about some of the most occulted truths, pedophile rings, and systemic organized abuse networks across the UK and beyond, all because this one man has the courage to do what is right, despite the toll it has taken on his health, well-being, and life. Dave's story is a remarkable story of recovery and forgiveness. Between the lines of disclosure, you will see a resilient man who praises and gives all his glory to God. In Dave's own words, quote, I am so grateful that God has chosen me to go out and show the evil that exists in Scotland and to tell the world to put his children first. And that will be the underlying message of Dave's testimony and the message we want you on the other side of the screen to take with you. I ask you all to please put away whatever you're doing, grab a pen and paper, and get ready to listen to one of the most incredible testimonials you will ever hear, brought to you by an incredibly courageous man who is risking it all to share with us and to bring justice once and for all to every survivor whose voice in life was silenced and taken from them. Until now. Before I finish introducing today's guest, I wanted to give just a couple quick reminders and updates. If you'd like to be on the show, share any information privately with me, or send me a written testimony for my upcoming book series, or to be written in a Substack article, you can email me at imagineabetterworld2020@gmail.com or standbysurvivors@protonmail.com. As some of you know, my YouTube channel was recently terminated, and I've been forced to pivot and use other streaming platforms to get this important information out to the public and disclosure community. Your support would mean the world to me on platforms like Rumble and X, where I'm currently streaming. And I also just started another YouTube channel with the handle at Imagination Podcast Official that I will be rebuilding, and I would also love to have you all subscribe there as well. I need to figure out my new presence on YouTube, and in order to do that, I need to look at ways that I can be on YouTube and dodge the censorship and backlash for speaking out about these difficult topics. Thank you all on the other side of the screen for helping to make the imagination the safest space on the internet for survivor, whistleblower, advocate, and educator disclosures. So you guys, without further ado, please help me in welcoming today's guest of honor, man of God, voice for the voiceless, survivor and overcomer, anti-child abuse advocate, walking miracle, an absolute warrior, the one, the only, Dave Sharp. Dave, it is an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
That's quite an introduction, Emma. Thank you very much. I've followed a number of your podcasts, most of them for a few years now, and it's a real privilege to be able to come on. One of the things, as we just spoke about, was this is an opportunity that doesn't come up very often, in that most of the podcasts and interviews I give are in the UK, and therefore it's not so easy to talk about the trafficking or the ritual abuses. And one of the things that's quite noticeable, and I know I've got a lot of friends in America, and I've watched a few podcasts that you've been on with American podcasters where they talk about this subject quite openly, and also in Australia where people will quite often say, Dave, why is there no one talking about this? Why is it we have these drug deaths and all these suicides, but nobody goes back a page in the life of that drug death? Why is nobody able to talk about this in interviews? And why is nobody the interviews able to talk about it? It's as if we've all became brainwashed, or somehow something happened, Emma, years and years ago. And I'm talking specifically about Scotland, where the ability or the necessity to talk about these subjects got taken away. And if I can give one good reference to Lady Smith, the chair of the Child Abuse Inquiry, the Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry, she said recently that over the last 50 years, we, the people of Scotland, turned our back on all the children who were in the care system. But what she didn't mention is what she couldn't mention, was that while we were all in the care system, our families and our communities were all being threatened with violence by the church and by the authorities. And Scotland has never, ever learnt how to deal with that issue. And as a result, we've now become a nation where talking about child sex abuse is just a no-no. And there's a lot of people that hide behind that weakness, but there's also a lot of people who use it to their own advantage to exploit survivors, which we'll go really into. But what I also wanted to talk about was with the child abuse, with the grooming process, with the satanic ritual abuses, how we were threatened. One of the biggest things that I find with a lot of survivors I've done, and remember, I've spoken to hundreds of survivors. I started my group S.A.F.E in 2016, but I was campaigning long before, standing on the streets of London, all over the UK, but more so in Scotland, where people would come forward and they were too scared to talk about it because of the threats that had been made against them, you know. And it was those threats of violence that people live with their whole life. That, along with being drugged. A lot of people in the UK will not talk about the drug situation. Again, I've been in many podcasts with yourself, in American podcasts, where people talk openly. People like Gacy and others, prominent child abuse campaigners, who talk openly about this. But it seems like another world from where we are. And one of the other things is kind of where I wanted to start as well, is how we were taught how to lie, and how that, there's a saying, I don't know if it's the same in America, we've got a saying over here that no one likes a liar. Well, even as children, you know, I'll start at the beginning. As I say, just before, I wasn't even one when my mother died, and I was taken into the orphanage run by the nuns, Sisters of Mercy, the Catholic Church, where I spent my first 8 years. I don't have many memories, good or bad, other than, yeah, we all got in trouble and stuff. But from the age of 8, I was taken it from that Nazareth House orphanage to another orphanage near Edinburgh called Glasgow, which I've got no memories of. No memories at all. When I think about this place, I can see the front gate, I can see the big wall, but if I look over, it's just black. So those have been darkened. But when we talk later on about my experience with the child abuse inquiry, we'll begin to see how they used that. They used these kind of dark periods to cover up what was happening to a lot of the survivors. For example, when I tried to get my records to prove where I was, very similar to Kevin, who we were speaking about, records was very, very hard to find. But what happened is, I can tell you I was taken to London. I can tell you the name of the person. I can tell you where I was taken to. I can tell you the various peoples in Glasgow, Bathgate, other places. I can tell you the names of the people. In one of the places I was taken, I found out I had a younger sister. So I've got a younger sister who's 9 months younger than me. So she died then. But I also know we were taken to these various places, which was like big posh castles on the edge of the locks, these picturesque places where you see on the telly, when you see these holiday brochures, and now they use the drones to fly over the lakes, and you can see the beautiful woods on the other side, and every now and again, you'll see these castles. These are the rich places where we were taken to. And one of the things what used to happen is when we got threatened, when we were in the dormitories, for example, let me go back a bit. When we were in the dormitories, this is me going forward now to St Ninians, where I went from the age of 12. So from age of 8 till 12, I've got no memory. I'm then being taken to St Ninians, which is run by the Irish Christian Brothers. These are like priests, but they don't do mass. These are men who don't do any public duties. So therefore, unlike priests, they don't have any fear of anybody turning up and recognising them. And this is why they were known as some of the most fearsome and aggressive people in any religious sectors. And we know from experience and from listening to other survivors, many of the times we were taken into these ritual abuses, there would be men turn up wearing masks. And we kind of assumed in it, and I've heard other people verify this, that this was priests that used to join in, and they didn't want to be recognised, so they would wear masks. But what would happen is, we were in this dormitory, and this is where I just sort of first arrived, where there was a young boy in the bed next to me. Now, what used to happen is, I used to pray that he would get picked instead of me, to be taken in and be abused. Sometimes my prayers would be answered, sometimes they wouldn't. And sometimes we would actually be put in single rooms as well. Now, when we were in these single rooms, and I think I sent you some examples and some proof of this, where, especially at the weekends and holiday times, because we were orphans, everybody else would get taken home. Many buses would pull up and take the people from certain areas home to where they lived. And we would look out the window, and it was a great big castle, 16th century castle in the middle of Fife. And as these vans all pulled away and people left, all of a sudden, over the hill, you would see these other minibuses turn up. And these were people, priests, politicians, judges, all kinds of people who would turn up to abuse all the children. We would have all these ritual abuses and these sex parties. And what happened is if you were in a single bed, quite often, and again, what I have to tell you, and this is really, really important, a lot of the stuff which what I'm talking about, Emma, it is snippets. Again, you don't know the full story because, as I say, we know. If I give you my very, very first experience that I remember was when this man, Brother Ryan, who was the head man, he came into my room once, took me out of my bed, took me into his room, and I don't know what happened, but I woke up in the morning and I was in his arms and I was naked and he was naked. And he was telling me how much he loved me. It took me years and years to work out that I'd been drugged. This was the start of the process. Now, what happened with my little friend is one day he disappeared off the face of the earth. And I started asking questions. Where's my friend gone? Where's my friend gone? And this Christian brother took me down to the cellars, which we know many, many, many men have told about the experiences they experienced down there. Well, I was taken down to the cellars. I was told to wait, and what he did was he blindfolded me, and then he put a rope around my neck, and then I heard all these other men come in, and then he put a rope around my neck, tied my hands behind my back, and he tied me to the shower, and then they all beat me, and then they all raped me, and then he left me there. Now, what he said to me was, if you ever tell anybody what happened here, you're going to get murdered, just like your wee mate. So from that moment on, this man ruled every part of my life. This man told me when to breathe. This man told me when to blink. That this man ruled every single part of my life. What would happen a lot as well is that when we used to go down for the showers, we'd all go down in a queue. You got to remember, this is the 70s. There's no central heating or anything like that. And this was an old castle. And we used to have a little tiny towel round us. And it was freezing. And we all had to stand in a queue. And you would go around. There was 2 rows of showers. And there's many, many stories of boys talking about where he would just come in and start masturbating over them. And sometimes there'd be other priests there as well. Now, what would happen is when you're standing, there was no talking. You weren't allowed to speak. But all of a sudden they'd go, "Sharp, get over there, stay there." So he'd leave me there all night in the freezing cold in the dark. And then during the night, 2, 3, 4 in the morning, you would hear the keys going. And this was him coming down the stairs. And then he would come in and he would bend me over the sink. And he had the leather belts. It's called a taw in Scotland. I don't know what you call it in America. It's not a belt you put on. It's a specific 3-tongue belt for whipping. And he would beat me till I was black and blue and then rape me and then just leave me there. Other times he would leave you standing in the hallway all night. In the hallway in this building, it was known to be haunted. And one of the worst punishments was to stand in the hall all night because you'd be terrified that a ghost might come. So your ears would hurt so much, you would be scared to move. And then half an hour before breakfast, he would come and tell you to go up and get changed into your school clothes, and then you had to carry on your day. So this was my sort of existence for the best part of 6 years. Now, what would happen is sometimes you would be in your bed in the single rooms. And again, this is what I showed you. I sent you the paper thing. These parties would be going on, and you could have up to 3 men at a time who would come into your room really drunk, and they would, I mean, literally throw you off the walls. You'd have to be put on your knees, and they would masturbate over you and slap you and beat you up, and you couldn't scream, you couldn't speak. And then other times we would be taken away. We would be taken on these trips where we would be taken. I remember in Glasgow, we'd be taken to these shops, dress shops, clothes shops, because remember at this time, This was the early 70s, Emma. So I didn't even wear long trousers until I was 16. We all wore khakis. So I remember we'd be taking. There's a famous shop in Glasgow. It's called the Madhouse, and it's just basically a hippie shop where you get all fancy clothes. And they used to dress us up kind of weirdly in yellow trousers and flares, and we knew what was going to happen. This is where we would be getting trafficked over to these posh places. So we'd get taken in a car or a minibus, whatever it was, and we'd end up in the countryside, and we'd end up going down to these places where it was a big castle, and there'd be lots of men there. I wouldn't say any women, but this is where what would happen is we would get taken in there. We would be put in rooms where there'd be a lot of drinking. There would be a lot of drugs. We would get drink poured down us, and then there would be another room that had a kind of altar thing is where we would get strawberries, tomatoes, all red stuff. Everything was red, and we'd get tomatoes thrown at us. And as I'm talking to you now, I'm remembering 2 or 3 boys that was there, and up to like maybe 8 to 10 men. This was one of the specific sex parties that we experienced in Ireland as well. This is something that, and again, I must point out to you, Emma, that I've never ever explored or tried to read anything about. I don't anything like you talk about satanic ritual abuses. As soon as somebody starts talking about it to me, I don't want to know. I shut off. I don't. It's too triggering. So, and I remember even when I was at the child abuse inquiry, when afterwards you seen the newspaper, satanic, I got hundreds. I got all these, what do they call them, trolls. I got all these trolls from people. How dare you associate satanics with the Catholic Church? Though we're not evil like those people. So you can see how confused I was, because I don't know the difference. I really don't know what I saw and what I took part in. As far as I know, this is the same thing. What was happening was the same thing. And what would happen is they would take us out, and now it's night time, where they would take us into the woods. Now, when you were in the woods, various things would happen. Now, there was sometimes there we would get hung by a rope, and we'd be beaten. And men liked to rape boys this way. There were certain ways that men did stuff that you got to know, and the violence and things like that. And the grooming process was very brief. I remember that, but what used to happen is there was gravestones, and we would be blindfolded and tied to these gravestones, and again men would come over and masturbate all over us. And only I don't know, I'm not sure if I sent you an email, if you got it, just less than a year ago. This is 50 years later. And this happens quite a lot, where men will contact me and say, Dave, my name's so-and-so. Do you remember me? I said, no. And they say, I'm getting these flashbacks and you're in it. I said, well, go on, what? And they would tell me, they said, Dave, I don't know how to say this. I said, go on, it's okay. You've read. I'm very public about what happened. This is what we need. We need to talk about this. We need to go public with what we know. And they would say, Dave, I remember being tied up somewhere and blindfolded. And I'd say, well, listen, let me tell the story to you, what you're going to tell me, then you'll know that I understand. So I could describe where he was. I could describe the room where we were taken. I could describe where the coffin was, where it was put in the ground, and there was holes in it. In some cases, it was just tubes, but we were put in this. And what they would do is they would throw stones over it to simulate burial and just leave you there. I think a lot of the times as well, this is when we were drugged up as well. But I've done it quite often. That's why I have to have candles on in my flat all the time. It's quite often where we had a thing recently. I'll be very brief about this. In Britain, they changed the electricity system. So you've now got to have meters. And whereas before I've got to make sure I'm always topped up because I can't be in the dark. And what happened is they take a they take an amount of your money. So you could have, it says £6 left, but it goes out. And what was happening is I was in the coffin. So I had to phone the electricity company. I went on the news, I went on one of the news programmes, and people said, we're hearing other stories about this as well, how, we can't be in the dark. If you walk into a dark room, things like that. Unless you're in somebody's house, it's different. But like saying, I've got sort of 6 candles and 4 lights in a small bedroom, just, But anyway, it's, I was able to explain to this guy what had happened. But to go back to Joe, when you've been sexually abused and they're telling you not to tell anybody, and this is where I talk to people a lot about this, about lying. If you imagine yourself in this situation, Emma, where you've just been raped and you've just been beaten and you're covered in bruises and blood. And what I used to do is I would run and hide in the toilets, or I would hide in a cupboard. And then if somebody came in and opened up because they heard you crying, and they looked in and they said, "What are you doing? What do you do? What do you do?" You can't tell the truth because he might be in it. Most of it would be a teacher, if it was another boy, but whoever it was, you didn't know if you could trust them. So what you had to do is you had to find a way of lying. So I would say something like, even though I had no parents, I had no family, I was watching all the other kids and I'd learn off of them. So if somebody was crying and they said, "Oh, I just got a letter saying my mother's died," I said, "Right, I can use that." So I would say, "Oh, I just found out my mother's died. Oh, that's a shame." But I hadn't. But now I had to remember that because I've lied. So next time I see that person, if he sees me laughing, you understand? And that's what happens in your whole life. I've been in many, many jobs. I've went for many jobs. And one of the things they ask you first is, where are you from and what school did you go to? And I don't want to go through it all, so I'll say something else. "Oh, I was at that school." But once you lie, you've got to live that. And that's what you do your whole life, Emma. So that's why I say the lies are just as much as painful and hard as the actual abuse, because it affects every single relationship you have, And that's why as well I often say about especially clergy abuse, because so many people know that when we left and tried to get justice, we were made to look out as liars, and the whole thing was turned around. When you're a survivor of clergy abuse, you're left to feel the guilt of what happened. All the guilt is put onto you, and they're the ones that get off scot-free. So everybody who knows that knows how weak you are, and they use that way. And I've had it so often, whether it's charities or different organisations, it's all over the world. We are the weakest people, Emma, and that's what we need to change. It's become so easy for people in positions of power to use that, simply because we haven't found a way to talk about it, and it's now got to the stage where you say 20 years ago, many years ago, Scotland was known worldwide for always putting its children first. Now, Scotland's a bigger currency. Children are a bigger currency in Scotland than drugs, because so many people are making money out of the trauma. And all that trauma that you're carrying, when you think and expect you're going to get help, whether it's a child abuse charity or whether it's a child abuse charity or a child abuse inquiry, they've got you. They can do what they want with you, and they've got you for the rest of your life. This is why our friend Kevin had nowhere else to turn. This is why we have so many drug deaths. It's so difficult. And this is why, as well, we have many, many thousands of people, thousands and thousands of men and women who fled Scotland. Because as soon as you come out of there, the first thing you do is when you approach your GP, you're put straight onto prescribed medication, because the doctors don't want to hear about it. And then as soon as you start on medication and your life's turned around, every time you try and get help, you don't get put on any different drugs that's going to go you the other way to help you. you fall deeper and deeper into addiction, and then into a life of crime, prison, and mental hospitals. And that's why we have a situation now where it's endemic. It's everywhere now. You know, it's really, really difficult. And going back to St Ninians, that was me for 16 years. Some of that's some of the worst stuff I've told you. But as I say, even going to Ireland, with this Ryan, he used to take us places, and he would put us in, leave us with old folk, old people, for a day or two. And we found out later on that what he was doing was he was taking us to relatives of his. So when it came to being registered, what did these boys do during the holiday period? It's got it on register. Oh, I'm a nice man. I took him to visit my parents. And whereas I knew the real story was, hang on a minute, that's not true. We were taken to all these places to be sexually abused. I can tell you the name of the person in London, Pat and Margaret Lydiard. This is 1974. Do you remember, are you old enough to remember the Wombles, which was a pop group? Remember You're a Womble? It was in the charts.
It
Men
sounds
Dressed as
familiar,
Rats.
yes.
This was the day of that. That was the song. And I was actually taken to Wimbledon where the song was about. And I remember getting taken to these places, but I don't remember anything else. I remember very short periods of meeting people. But when you met them, then it goes blank. Were we being drugged and trafficked? More than likely. But it's very, very hard to actually describe. And this is why for so many people, especially when I started campaigning, when I started campaigning, especially in London, we used to often see these men and women come up. And it still happens now. Every single time I campaign, no matter where I'm campaigning, you will always see, when I'm talking about on the streets, you will always see people in the corners over there, or over there. And they're standing there. In those days, they used to have masks on and a Scotland flag. And I knew those people want to talk to me, but I wouldn't go over and talk to them, because you don't do that. You can't make somebody feel uncomfortable. You want them to come to you. And when they did, more and more stories come out, and they would say, I know what happened, but I don't know how to explain it. I don't know how to talk about it, because so many blanked out periods, which we spoke about before, eh? And that's why it's so difficult. And it's so difficult to get people to, even professionals, to talk about the drugs that was used. But also when you talk about the records, to sort of, it doesn't take a genius to marry up who was where and when, you know. But again, the records are one of the biggest talking points, because again, when I went to the child abuse inquiry 45 years later, when I saw they suddenly pulled out my records, it said on my records, during the holiday periods, Dave was taken back to Nazareth House. I thought, hang on a minute, you know that's not true. And you know that that's the place where I'm blank. I've got no memory of. So you're using this. And I knew then the child abuse inquiry was a total cover-up.
Wow. When are your earliest memories of being groomed? I know that you don't have memories from 8 to 12, and it seems like before that, the memories that you have are only good. Do you remember any grooming taking place between the years of 1 and 8, or anything that would suggest that you were targeted even then?
I've met dozens and dozens and dozens of other survivors who was in Nazareth House, Kilmarnock. And I did a podcast up there just a year or two ago. And they talk about real serious sex abuse that was going on. And this is the other thing, Emma, which kind of discussed a lot of us. At the time when the child abuse inquiry was going on, we had in the newspapers every day stories coming out, because the child abuse inquiry had just started, and we were hearing stories of nuns holding young girls down while priests were raping them, and also of nuns using crosses into women, into young girls. Real serious. And while this was all going on, we had the Scottish Parliament. We're in the Scottish Parliament, and everybody's laughing and joking about a new bridge that's going to be built over Aberdeen. And we're sitting thinking, why are you not focusing in on this? Why are you not picking up on this? And the answer is because they're all confident enough to know that it's been covered up. The politicians, the church leaders, that they know it's all been covered up so well that it's going to take a miracle. And we know miracles happen, don't we? And we know the truth is going to come out. The truth will come out. As I say, we know there's 4 or 5 other charities in Scotland who, and there is quite a few people who were in there at the same time as me who spoke about some really, really, really bad things that happened. But for me, between the age of 1 and 8, no, I don't have any bad experience. But again, then the question is that you ask again is, and again, this is what I learned on other podcasts as well, is how this period was used to groom us, because we were being ordered about. We were put in rooms. You know, when you were into the TV room, you sat there for hours on end. You were penned in like sheep, and if you did something wrong, if you got beat or slapped or the belt, you were too young to understand. But again, it was very, very easy. You can imagine this, Emma, and I do have nightmares a lot about this, is when you see the priests, how easy it would be for these men, these people, to pick out the ones that are getting primed. So yeah, it is a grooming process, because we didn't get visits. We, you know, even the ones, although it was an orphanage, a lot of families reconnected, you know, whether they were in prison or whatever it was. But in my case, my mother had died and that was it. I had no other family. So I was basically an orphan. And it was kind of known that apparently there was a story, and we didn't know how true this was. Apparently my father came looking for me once, but it was late at night, 10 o'clock at the night. And apparently he turned up at the home drunk, and one of the nuns had said to him, Dave's been taken away. He's been fostered out or adopted to a rich family who's got a farm and they've got horses. And you're better off just forgetting him. Let him live his life. And yeah, I found that story later on, years later. Again, I don't know how true it was, but yeah, this is what the nuns had said, that I'd been taken away. So that was me in there. That's where I was going to stay for the next 16 years. And as I say, the middle one, Nazareth House, Last Wade, a lot has been said about this home, Emma. It's very, very, very hard to find people who will talk about it. Now, we know, for example, there's photographs of Sabo turning up there in his Rolls Royce with lots of presents. You know, Sabo's another subject altogether, which we'll talk about later. When I suddenly started coming out to the police after 2010, when all of a sudden the police were very receptive and listening to me, because they had no option, because I had a whole load of other men, you know, that had also experienced. But then all of a sudden, when Sabo came, everything exploded. Then the police started mixing up everybody's stories. There was this nationwide rule. Again, it took me a long time to understand it. There was a nationwide rule. You must shut down all the Sabo stories. So that's why Sabo's never mentioned in the Children's Inquiry. That's why I know 2 survivors in Scotland who applied to speak to the Children's Inquiry about Sabo, and they were turned away. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? When we know fine well, for over 30 years, this man was one of the top clansmen of one of the excuse me, the clans in Scotland. He got this award. He had a big bungalow thing in the north of Scotland. He travelled around Scotland for over 30 years, but all of a sudden he disappeared. So we know in Nazareth House, Last Wade, we've all tried. And again, podcasts like this is where I know for a fact, 8 people. People often ask me, how many do you think, Dave? And I say, well, I know of at least 8 people who told me they were abused by Sabo in Scotland. They gave me various stories. And people say to me, and I've asked myself, was I abused by Sabo during those 3 years? I've got no idea. But then you also ask, when I got taken down to London, was I part of the big I don't know if you know the Dolphin House story, the big paedophile ring with all the politicians in London. Again, that was all very well covered up. You don't know. This is where the whole jigsaw thing is, Emma. This is why it's so important when you sort of, like I say, when people phone me and tell me, I had this experience happen to me, and I'm able to say to them, listen, you're part of a jigsaw. Unless we find a way to come out, and as I said before this podcast, Emma, this is not about people believing me or believing us. It's about other people coming forward and helping us join the dots, because we know it happened. And even now, we know that all over the world now, all over the world, survivors of clergy abuse are coming forward in the thousands. And we know lights are coming on across the globe. And the more lights that come on, people are turning around to the UK, and especially in Scotland, and asking that question, why is it still so dark? Why is there so many survivors of child sex abuse locked up in Scottish prisons? Why is it so easy for child abuse charities to make false allegations against their clients and put them in prison? What on earth is going on with the regulating? You know? And again, going back to Lady Smith, when Lady Smith said that 50 years ago that the country turned its back on its children, you look at Kevin's story, how even when people ran away, they were beaten up by the police and sent back. When anybody tried to even mention any kind of abuse, they disappeared faster than they came forward, because immediately you're shut down. And again, this leaves the door open to so much further abuse. You know, it's with all the ritual abuse, that there's so many different what do you call them, operations. There were so many police operations, Emma. Operation Winterton was the one involved when I came forward. Now, over 70 men came forward. Out of those 70, and this is a regular, very, very regular pattern in Scotland with all the operations that go on, what happens is a couple of people come forward, the police make a statement, or the press make a statement. All of a sudden, dozens and dozens of men and women come forward. The police say, we're opening an investigation, and then word gets round the community. Everybody knows what's happening, but then by the time it gets, and we also know that up to a dozen men have been arrested. It goes quiet for about a year, and then what happens is, when it comes to the court case, six men, the survivors, have to give their testimony, and probably two priests or two people that worked in the home. And you say to yourself, where's all the rest of them? What happened to the rest of them? Well, I can sit here now and I can tell you, I can sit here for 2 hours and I can give you dozens and dozens and dozens of stories that I know. And again, this is why everybody was telling me, you've got to be so careful, you know too much. You're too good at what you're doing. You're going out on the streets of Glasgow and Edinburgh. What I did is I went out for 3 days. So the first day we'd go on the street, we'd get the word out there, we'd contact the press. So the second day, we're all over the news. More people would come forward. We're hearing all these different stories, what's happening, of satanic ritual abuse, family, all kinds of abuse. And then on the third day, we've got more people coming up. And at night time, what we would do, if we were in Dundee, we would hire a hall, maybe a church hall, or a village or a hanging hall, and we'd invite the local agencies, like drug agencies, charities, even the police, come forward and meet. But we only done it twice, and that's when somebody said, no, you've got to stop this, man. Whether it's the government, whether it's the police, whether it's the charity did it on their own, but it was the lawyers, who we know was heavily involved, who said, we've got to stop Dave Sharp. And that's how it all happened. It just all came to a sudden halt. But I knew so much about what was happening in Scotland. And with the child abuse inquiry, Emma, it got to the point, I knew so much that I knew if someone came up to me in the street, hi Dave, I've seen you in the papers, and my name's so-and-so, and they tell me where they were abused, how they were abused, and who abused them, whatever they told me, I knew whether they'd go to the inquiry or not, because I started to realise how the cover-ups worked. So if there was somebody said they were abused by a priest, and I won't say the name of a town, I don't want to start frightening people, we'll make up a name, Argo. That's just a made-up name of a place in Scotland. So somebody was abused by a priest in the Catholic Church in Argo. I could think, and I'd list all these stuff of people I knew, and I could say he was connected there, right? So he's part of this. I started seeing how the paedophile rings were working. I actually got to see and know who was where, and how big Ryan was in St Ninians, and how the different lawyers and stuff, judges, politicians, and again, in my book, other people will have a lot of different avenues, and to me, in my eyes, Nazareth House last Wade was the biggest. Something big happened there. I don't know, you won't know Tam Payton, the Bay City Rollers. You remember the group, the Bay City Rollers? Are you too young? They had all the tapping on. They used to be in the charts. They're the second most famous boy band apart from the Beatles. And their manager was a very famous paedophile. And he lived just less than a mile or a couple of miles from Nazareth House. And he was very famous for having big parties and having a lot of politicians and stuff there. And again, this was all kept quiet as well. So I started to get a picture of who was where and what would happen. And there was many people, many times I got it wrong, where I have this really sad story where it was a woman who was abused by so-and-so, and her mother had died, and she was quite old, and she said, will you come with me? I said, of course I'll come with you. I'll be with you every step of the way. And she went and she said, I'm going to buy new shoes, and I want to wear my mother's coat, and I'm going to get my hair done. You're the only person, Dave, I've ever spoke to about this, about the sex abuse I suffered. But if you come with me, I'll stand up and I'll tell. I said, okay, no worries. And she went and she bought a nice big fur coat and stuff. And then the day before, they got her and said, sorry, you're not wanted. And it clicked. I suddenly understood why. And she was so angry with me. Don't you ever contact me again. Don't you ever do that. And she never spoke to me again. And this is some of the things that happened, is where you got yourself in situations. But also as well as if we go back to Sabo, see what happened is, again, I need to go forward and back quite a bit. When I was 16, what happened was I was in the home, and we'll move forward now, because I could talk about this all night, but let's chronolise. Let's try and get into some chronological thing just now. What happened was, that was my life for 6 years, getting taken out, and in the holiday periods, these men would come, or we would get taken somewhere. The showers was really bad, the bedrooms was really, really bad. But what happened with Joe is, I have to tell you now, because every time I tell my story, if I don't tell you in part one, lots of people are going to phone me and text me saying, what happened to Joe? You never told us. So it's better if I tell you now, so that people can get an understanding of how cruel these people were, Emma. This is the cruelty of, when I say about the threats that they made to us, how bad these were. When this guy said to me, you tell anybody what happened to you and you're going to be murdered, just like your wee mate, that affected every single relationship I had, really. I've had over 100 jobs, Emma. I've lived in over 100 different places. Even now, I've been running my whole life. Even when I found my family, I couldn't tell them about it, and I lost them. I tried to make the relationships work, but they wouldn't. They couldn't. We'd never been bonded as children, so it didn't work. And what happened was, it wasn't till 2010 was when things changed. I mean, things changed before. I'll go back and forth But in 2000, I'll stick to the Joe story just now, eh? In 2010, when the Pope came over to the UK, and he went to Ireland first, and he apologised to the survivors prominently. He said, I apologise. And then he went to Scotland, and he did. I was there. We were standing outside. It was only a very small group. There was no campaigning or anything going on in Scotland at that time, but we were standing outside. And the Pope then, when he left, he got on an aeroplane and left, and he didn't apologise. And that lit something in Scottish survivors. That lit something in me. Right, I've now got to do something about this, because this has affected my whole life. And that was when I decided, right, I'm going to start really campaigning. I'd started campaigning when my wife died, but again, I need to stick to this, get this Joe story out, right? So that was when I started going to the press. That's when I started contacting the Scottish government. That's when I started contacting the Christian brothers. That's when I went to the police and I said, listen, I want to tell you that this and that, my testimony, but I didn't mention the murder. So then all of a sudden, I went to the press, people coming forward, and the thing just took off. I started campaigning outside the Scottish government, at the Parliament, and then one day something happened. And I phoned this guy who I'd started to become friends with, a reporter, a news reporter. And I said, no, it was a police officer, a woman friend, a woman who I'd befriended. She was a counsellor. And I phoned her up one day. She was really good. She was helping me, because this is when now Sabo was coming out. All of a sudden, things were getting twisted. I could tell you so many stories about men who took their own life, committed suicide, because a week ago or 2 weeks ago or a month ago, I told them to go to the police, and then the police were now going back and tell them, we've not got any proof, we think you're lying, and they hung themselves. That's what was happening. That's what was happening. So I said to this woman, I said, listen, I've got something I need to tell you. I've never told anybody. And I said, I think there was a murder in the home. She said, what? I said, yeah. So I told her what had happened. And I said, I need to go to the police. Will you come with me? So she didn't come with me. So I went to the police and I told them. And then I went to the newspaper. And the newspaper came out, there's been a murder. The next day, lots of men came forward. Now, the guy who made the report, the newspaper guy, phoned me up. And he says, Dave, we're getting dozens and dozens of people who have heard your story. We've heard other stories. A lot of the things you're telling us, they're backing up. A lot of the things that you've told me and us that we haven't printed, they're backing up. For example, being put in coffins. But he said, we've got this one phone call that you need to take this call, Dave, from this guy. I said, what? Yeah, I mean, I was an open book. I always am, Emma. I'm an open book. I'm very open about who I am, what I've been through, and how it's affected my life and who I am. And I said, yeah, that's fine. Okay, that's fine. So I got this phone call from this man. And this man says to me, hi, Dave, I'm so-and-so. Do you remember me? I said, no, mate, I don't remember anybody, because you know what I was going through. And he says, Dave, you've got it all wrong. I said, well, what do you mean? He says, your mate wasn't murdered. He said he hung himself. He was on home leave. He was 12 years of age. And his parents wouldn't believe that he was being sexually abused, and they were trying to send him back. So he hung himself. And I remember I fell to my knees and I thought, how could he be so cruel to do that to me, a young 10-year-old, 12-year-old child? And how that affected every single relationship in my life. How could you do that? It's just horrific to think of all the relationships I tried and lost with my family, and every time I tried to get a job or the more I tried, the more I just, when I left the home, Emma, within weeks I was on the streets. Within weeks I had equivalent of £100 a day drug habit, because I was running away from these threats. And I was terrified of everybody that I met. They were going to find out, and they were going to be murdered as well. And that's why I ended up in London. I moved to England because I had a brother in Northampton. And he had a family. But by this time, I'd already picking up a very serious drug habit. And I found very quickly the best place to be was London. So even though I'm only 16, 17, I ended up in London, and I was lucky in the sense that I started living with a lot of old Scottish guys who had been on the streets for years, who took me under the wing and showed me the ropes. They showed me how to pickpocket, they showed me how to shoplift, and how to survive, and how to drink white spirits and get drunk, methylated spirits, and, and within a very short period of time, I had a huge, huge drug habit and alcohol habit. And what used to happen, Emma, is when you were on the streets, we used to see all these children turn up, some as young as 12, 13, 14. Again, this is Kevin's story coming out again. This is exactly what the same thing is. These young kids would turn up, and each one of them would have a rucksack. And in the rucksack, they would have two things. Do you know what they were? Change of clothes and photographs of their family. And when you sat down with them, you would hear the exact same story of what happened to me, how they'd been in the care system or in the family setting where they'd been sexually abused, and then they ran away. And what happened is very, very quickly, these children get picked up by the drug pushers and the pimps, and very quickly they get put onto drugs and then put straight onto the sex trade. And quite often we'd all be sitting in derelict buildings. Many, many times we'd be sitting in a derelict building with a fire, and one of these young kids would come up to me and say, Dave, I've got a punter. Can you watch my bag for me? I've got to go with this man in this car. And I would turn round and there'd be a big fancy Jaguar with a priest in the back seat. Yeah, quite more often than not. And then he would leave me back. He or she would leave the rucksack with me, and I'd wait an hour. Then I'd wait 2 hours. I'd wait 3 hours. And then I'd fall asleep and I woke up. You see, I couldn't move because at that time, I was the only friend they had in the world. And they were the only friend I had. And I suddenly realised they're not coming back. And then what would happen after a few months, I'd wake up in these derelict buildings. And then as the light came in the morning, through the broken windows and the smashed roofs, as the light came in, you would see dozens and dozens of empty rucksacks. And that's what lives with me all my life. And that's why now, even now, 50 years later, every December or between Christmas time, I go down to London and I find that I'll sit in where we used to sit, and I'll sit there. Sometimes I take my guitar or just take my iPhone and headphones, and I sit and play my Beatles songs that we used to sing. And I start singing, and I can hear them, and I can smell them, and I can see them. And I often wonder which ones survived. Have they got families? Or are they still trapped in the sex trade, even now, all these years later? So that's what drives me all the time. That's what goes through my head all the time. I'll just let that sink in for a minute, because I'm just going to take a drink.
Absolutely, yes. And I wanted to ask a couple questions at these schools that you were at. And I know that you don't remember being at Nazareth. So let's go about age 8 to 16, around the time whenever you got into the sort of last place.
Oh, names.
How many people on staff were involved?
In the abuse.
Yes.
Ryan was the master. Ryan was the master. Now, when these people came at the holiday times, there could be up to 10 when we got taken place. I'll give you an example. From 2011, when I was trying to get the police to listen to me, there was times when everything's going really well. And then, as I say, when Savo came on the scene, everything changed. All of a sudden, the police would phone me and say, Dave, we're doing some investigating here. You said that you were abused by Father Ryan, Brother Ryan. Is it Jerry Ryan? I said, yep, Brother Jerry. Dave, are you sure you're not confused? Because there was another one called Joe Ryan. Well, I knew that's not true. This is when they were trying to manipulate us, right? Now, I started getting all the information. I started speaking to other survivors. This was my life. I've been doing this since 1998, since my wife died. Been talking to other people. In 2013, I was pestering the police all the time. I said, listen, we know there's others, Manley, Maguire. I gave them all the names. But what happened was, I remember saying to the police, because I lived in England at the time. I'd now moved to England and I was living in Northampton. I can, if you, I said this repeatedly, we know that you know the paedophile ring. We know you know that. I know that you know because I know so many people that have come forward. I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If I come up to Glasgow, if I meet with you, if you put 100 photographs on a table, if you put 100 photographs on the table and put 10 of the men who was in this satanic ritual abuse ring, I know for a fact I can pick 6 at least because they're all etched in my head. There's the big fat one who was the ringleader, to the little men who were the little, excuse me, and Ryan was part of that, but he ran the other part. He would have other men with him in Ireland and in St Ninians. But this other, there was 2 rings that I was in that I know of. But I used to say to the police, and a couple of times as well, Emma, where I've gone up to Glasgow with a box full of statements, all kinds of stuff. I said, listen, meet with me, sit down. And they used to say to me, right, what we'll do is we want you to set up a meeting with the police in England where you live. So I did this, and a guy came out. He turned out to be a friend of mine. Chief Inspector Long. He was a sergeant at the time. And he sat down after a while. He says, Dave, I'm really not comfortable with this. I don't like the way they're palming you off. They should be flying you up first class. And they should be buying you into hotels. And they should be sitting down and getting every bit of this. You've just sat here for 5 hours and told me everything, all these paedophile rings. Why is Police Scotland not coming and grabbing you? I said, listen, I've been up a couple. I remember the names. Chief Inspector Ian Anderson, Sergeant McGuinness. These are all the police officers that were supposed to be helping us. And I remember Chief Inspector Ian Anderson said to me, right, okay, we'll set up a meeting. Come up to Glasgow and we'll meet. I said, right, great. I said, I'll bring all my evidence. I've got it all in a box. I've got statements. I had statements from the Christian Brothers that I'd intercepted. I was supposed to get meetings with the Christian Brothers, and they were sending me these emails, but it was, and I think it was a mistake. There was trails on these emails where people involved with the Christian Brothers saying things like, and I've got them all here, dealing with child sex abuse seems to be our most busiest thing that we're doing right now. Things like this, you're thinking, wow, that's a bizarre thing, and I wasn't supposed to be reading these things because I'd been caught in this email trail. Yeah, are you the same as me? I'm getting child sex abuse allegations almost on a daily basis now. These are the things I was reading. And I had all this, and I would go up to Pitt Street, Glasgow Police Station. I'd sit there, and somebody come out, I'd say, I'm here to see Chief Inspector Ian Anderson, and I'd sit there, and I'd be there like over an hour, well over an hour, and this other guy came out, he said, Dave, listen, everybody's too busy at the moment. Why don't you just go home? We're not going to take this anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere with this. I said, I'm going to wait. And I'd stay there, and then I'd go out, and I'd be walking about, and I'd start crying, because I was just so, this when I had a mental breakdown as well, because at the same time, Emma, I had 20 names, just where I'm sitting now. I've got a bookcase, hang on, sorry. I'm pointing up here, in my flat, I've got a bookcase, hang on, I had 19, 20 candles with people's names on them who were child sex abuse survivors who'd either overdosed or took their own life. So I was living completely on the edge, dealing with all this. And I went up to Glasgow, did this, and then I'm walking through Glasgow, and then my phone went, and it was this Chief Inspector. And he says, Dave, why don't you just drop it? I said, what, drop? And I was crying my eyes out in the middle of the street. I've got this big box. And I said, why are you covering all this up? Why are you doing this? Why are you not helping us? Dave, there's nothing to tell. There's not, even although the newspaper things I'd sent you were from 2 years prior, where all these other men have come forward and they too were taken over to Ireland. You read that, right? So I'm not making this up. But all they wanted to do, Emma, as with everybody, they want to twist it all round and make out that you're the liar, you're crazy, your trauma is driving you mad, and you're the bad one. And that's the way you spend your whole life. So to answer your question, Ryan was the main instigator, and we know he had tentacles everywhere, everywhere. You know, I won't go so far as to say he was the worst paedophile in Scottish history. That was Savile, right? That we know that was Savile, but he had huge. Another example, which you probably read it. This is one of the things that one of the most powerful things that grabbed me. This man had so much power. This Ryan had so much power that he had a room, his bedroom, in the hall where we were. You know, there's the dormitories, and then in between the dormitories is his room. At any one time, Emma, he could have 20 boys in that room, all sitting while he masturbated. That is power. That is serious power. And then all of a sudden, in front of everybody, he'd pick somebody. Most of the time it was me. And you go over and he'd say, right, get on your knees. And then he would just beat the hell out of you. I mean, seriously, just beat you. And everybody else is sitting just terrified. You can't jump up and name it. And again, when you read in the newspaper all the articles, there was a lot of the bigger boys said, you know, they had these rules. If he comes near any of us, we all get on them. You know, there was Ryan, there was Manley, whoever it was, there was other ones doing it. But they had this rule if he comes in. But again, here's another thing. Because I'd been in Nazareth House, the orphanage, from the age of 1 to 8 and then 8 to 12. When I was 12, I went, that's Ryan right in the middle there. You see it? That's Ryan. Yeah, that's him. Yeah. Scary man. Scary, very, very dangerous man. I see, when I was taken to St. Ninian's first, there was a group of boys. In those days, in the early 70s, gangs were everywhere, right? So this group of boys grabbed me and they said to me, that's my friend George. You know, his story is 17 brothers and sisters. And they were all in St. Ninian's, the men. He got the most amazing testimony of that man, and he helped me a lot. But a group of boys grabbed me and they said, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from here. No, they said, where are you actually from? I said, well, here. No, where have you come from? I said, I don't know. I've got no idea. What do you mean? Because I didn't know, Emma. I didn't know the question. I didn't know, because I'd been locked away for all those years. Yes, we went out the daytime, went to school, and I heard stories about, people told me years later how when we used to leave the first one, 1 to 8, people used to talk about us walking down through the town in the summer, and the local people used to say, all these children looked emancipated and weak and thin, and everybody used to worry what the way they were being treated, you know. So, and that's all. I don't remember anything else. I don't remember any families or visits or Christmas or birthdays or anything, like nothing. I don't remember anything. But when these boys were saying, where are you from? Where's your mum and dad? I said, what's that? I don't have any of them. And one of them came over and punched me. And then I went on the floor and they all jumped on me and they said, right, you're an orphan. So that was my nickname. From then on, I was the orphan. And all these young bucks used to beat me up just to impress the big gang leaders and stuff. Ryan and his co used this. This is where we became the runt of the litter, as it were. So it was far easier for these paedophiles to pick on us. And again, as I said, with the social services, none of that existed. Nobody came out. Nobody came out and visited us and checked us. You know, I watched a programme the other night, you're probably familiar with it, the Turpin family, the 13 siblings. And I was kind of looking at that, and I was thinking that's just like what I was. That's just that we never. When she was asked, "Have you had any medication?" She said, "What's that?" Yeah, this is the kind of things that when people talk to me now, you notice I don't use any big words because I don't remember any education at all. I don't remember any, apart from, as I say, in the maths class when he used to leave me there all night and I'd sleep under the desk and he'd come in and rape me. But I don't remember any exams or any qualification, nothing like that. But again, as I say, that shows you how Ryan and the paedophiles, when it came to the holiday time, just how incapable we were of fighting back, of reporting. I remember once I ran away. Everybody's got the same story. You ran away and you got 100 yards, thought, where am I going? I had nowhere to go. So I had to go back. You know, it doesn't, I know nothing. You got beat up by the police and sent back, beat up again. But I'm trying to picture this young guy, this young kid, who was just passed around from home to home, from foster family to adopted out. And then again, when you go fast forward 50 years to the child abuse inquiry, when they come and pull out your records, when they know this story, because they've seen all the newspapers, and yet they had to do that for a child abuse inquiry, Emma. When I never see when you go to the child abuse inquiry, you go up a few days before. I think I read this. You've seen this. I wrote it on Kenny's thing. You got up a few days before, and they said, and all of a sudden they pulled out my records. And I thought, where did you get them from? And they refused to tell me. I said, come on, surely I have a right to know. And then I opened it up and I thought, what's this? And it said in the one bit, during the holiday periods, David was taken back to Nazareth House last week. And I thought, hang on a minute, you know fine well I've got no memory of that. And you know that's not true. You know that's not true. Because I've got all these names and places of where I was taken. Now you're just covering the whole thing up, and that's what the whole child abuse inquiry was. But at this time, as a 16-year-old, I'm now asking questions. I'm now asking, why are all these other kids? Why do they get to go away at weekends? And why do they all come back with guitars and cigarettes and sweeties and new trousers and happy stories? But I'm left here and I'm getting raped and beaten and taken out and put into these abuses. Why can't I have that? And the reason that happened, excuse me, what had actually happened was, Emma, somebody came up to me one day and said, you're going to be relieved. In those days, you left when you turned 16. When you were 16, you left. So most of them obviously went to their families because most of them had committed crimes, but I hadn't. I was an orphan. I was just in there because I was too old for the orphanage. He said, when you're 16, you're going to be going to live in a hostel. I said, what's that? Oh, he said, it's a home for adult men. I thought, oh, I don't like the sound of that. I really, really don't like the sound of that. Oh, you'll be fine. You'll be able to get a job and earn money. And I thought, this is all, you might as well be talking Russian. I have no understanding. So what happened is one day I was down in the basement in the woodwork class. We were doing woodwork. Now, in the home, there was a tannoy system. John Brown, probation. Hugh Smith, you've got to visit. You know, in all those years, my name had never, ever, ever been mentioned. And this day I'm in the woodwork class, and it says, David Sharp, go up to the probation office. And everybody stopped and looked. And I thought, what? I didn't know what to do. 6 years, I'd never been anywhere, never that I knew, like comfortable or, apart from being trafficked. Okay, so I went out and I was up the stairs and I go to this room And there's this man there with a woman. He said, this is Miss Lobo. He said, she's a probation officer, and she says she's here to tell you that we found your family. What? We found your family, and your family live in Glasgow. Of course, Glasgow is the best place to be because this is where all the gangs, the hard people come from, and they've got all the most money and the best friends. And he says, you're going to go next week for a visit. Everything's changed. Everything's just completely changed. I can't. And I remember running down the stairs, and on the way down the stairs, I'm shouting, I'm not an orphan. I'm not an orphan. I've got a family. I get so upset every time I think about it. I just couldn't, just amazing. I just couldn't believe what had happened. And I ran into the woodwork class and I'm not an orphan. I'm not an orphan. I'm from Glasgow. And nobody took any notice. And yeah, I mean, 16 years. I'd spent 16 years being moved about everywhere. And I often think, well, what was your expectations? What were you, I had no, what do you call it, pre anything, to prepare you for this. Just locked away for the first 16 years of your life and no understanding. I mean, I don't know how much you know about Glasgow in the 70s. It was not a nice place to live. It's just as any other city in those days, eh? So it was arranged I was to go and meet these people. So I remember I got in the car and she was driving too slow and I was, please put your foot down, please. And we eventually got to Glasgow and they took me up the stairs to this house. And in this house was all these people. And this is your sister, your brother. And there was a man over here, a guy a bit older, and he had all this long hair and all these tattoos and jeans and a Wrangler jacket. And I thought, oh, he said, that's your brother. And what? That's my brother. Wow. I just couldn't. This is incredible. And I stuck to him like glue. This is your dad. And there was a guy over there drunk. And this is your Granny Sharp. And this is your sister. And the weekend, I had the most amazing weekend. It was just the most incredible. Everybody kept giving me money. But I'd never had money long enough to get acquainted to it. I'd never seen it. I'd never know. Because in the homes, what happens is, in those days, on a Wednesday night and a Saturday night, you queue up in what's called a tuck shop. So you queue up and you go in and you can buy 2 packets of Polo mints or, a packet of sweeties. That's it. You don't see any money. You just buy that. But now I'm getting coins, I'm getting paper, and somebody bought me a pair of jeans. So I've got my first pair of trousers. And I went to my first football match, Rangers, Glasgow Rangers, and I bought a scarf. And you've got to remember now, you might not know this, but in the homes with the Catholic Church, that's all Catholic and they all support Celtic. But I'd never really supported anybody because I was too busy trying to survive to be any football supporter. But now all of a sudden, they've took me a football match and I got a scarf and and it was just so amazing. So I went back and they took me and they said, how did you get on? How would you like to go and live there? I said, what? Wow. And I remember I went back to my bedroom and I put the scarf up and all these boys came in, the Glasgow boys, and they set it on fire and they beat the crap out of me because I was Rangers. But the point is, Emma, I didn't feel anything because I knew I had a family. Nothing mattered. Nothing else mattered. I had a family. And I mean, wow. And for days, in days, people ask me, well, how did the abuse stop? I don't know. It just stopped. I don't know what happened. I don't remember, as I say, getting taken in a room and saying, because I'd already been going through the threats. They knew. They knew. And this is, as you know this very well, when you leave, you don't get apologies. You don't get divorced from the church. They divorce you. You're kicked out. and you're left with all that trauma and guilt and shame of what happened to you because they make you feel like that, you know, that you took part in these things. How dare you let us do this to you, you know? And that's what you carry for the rest of your life. And that's what I was talking about recently with the Church of England, about this silence at the moment with the Archbishop of Canterbury, how everybody's now so focused on getting all the men out and getting women in there as leading the church. Are you going to be any different? Are you actually going to sit down and listen to survivors? You know, safeguarding. If you want to say you're trauma informed, if somebody's trauma, if we want to get our trauma dealt with, we'll go to a trauma expert. But if you're in the church, if you're a safeguarding officer of any church, we want to see the trauma. We want the trauma healed through Christ. We want to be accepted back into the church as a family of God, not abandoned. And that's why I teach to people about safeguarding officers. You can tell in 1 minute if they're working for the church or if they're slaves to the church or servants of God. You can tell straight away, you know, and it's not happening. And it's very quiet. It's very impossible for me to keep quiet about that, Emma, because unless they all come out and get on their knees and ask for forgiveness, nothing's going to change. So this was me now. I got taken out and I went to live with this man who was my father. And within a couple of days, he says, right, you need to go and look for a job and sign on for unemployment. Then you need to, sorry, say that again. Now, this man used to go out every day going to work. And then at night time after work, he'd go and get drunk and come in late at night. What have you been? And it was horrible, horrible, horrible. But I'm very reluctant to criticise my dad or any of my family because I must have been so difficult to handle. You know, it must have been really, really difficult for them. You know, I mean, even obviously years later when all the truth came out and it all, you know, everything was exposed, it was a bit different. But and then we found out my father was abusing one of my sisters, which which didn't make anything any easier. So that was really difficult. So that was my first 16 years in the homes. As I say, it feels like a prison sentence. And in many senses, it was a prison sentence. But then when you ask me now, if you were to ask me now, Emma, especially as far as children coming out the care system, and again, I refer back to Kevin, has anything really changed? No, it hasn't. It hasn't. Nothing's changed. This is still happening on a massive scale, more than people can even imagine. You know, again, as I say, when I went to one of the papers, I spoke somewhere, something happened, and what happened is I had this man phone me from the north of Scotland. You know, I'm in England. This man phoned me. He said, David, can I talk to you? He said, I had something happen, and I reported it to the police, and nothing happened. I said, well, what? And he told me about being put in the coffins. He told me the exact same story, and he described being taken in the country. And about 2 weeks later, I got the exact same phone call from a guy, 60, 70, 80 in Aberdeen, further up, the exact same story, who they had the exact same experience. And again, I was able to fill in and say to him, and everybody had the same thing in common. They reported it to the police and nothing happened.
The differences in, say, a story like yours and Kevin's, it was like different scenarios on how you both ended up there, different scenarios on family ties, different people that you guys dealt with, but the same story. And you hear it over and over and over and over again. And it's always the same names that come up too. And that's another thing, like why this is so concerning, because these aren't just like random people off the street that are like breaking into a school and abusing a kid, or, just a random person. Like this is a systemic thing that exists
Mm-hmm.
within the foundation of these care centers, schools. I mean, you name it, CPS out here in the United States. our foster care system, it's the same thing, right down to the people who help the children, the social workers. This is a systemic issue that is built into the school and these organizations and institutions. And you see how the protection works when you hear about, that's terrifying to me to think that many staff members were involved with the abuse and then covering it up, that all these staff members knew what was happening and didn't do anything. And people are going to ask, well, why wouldn't somebody have said something? Well, when you think about one pedophile getting into a school, climbing the ladder like this Ryan guy did, getting to the top of the school, who do you think he's going to hire? Is he going to hire people that are not pedophiles that would tell on him? No. He's going to
Exactly.
hire more pedophiles and people just like him underneath him and build into the foundation of these care centers people like him that will participate and will cover it up with him. And
Absolutely.
that's how
Yep.
it works. And it's not something that happens overnight. This is something that is very gradual. It's something that happens over time. But once it sets in and that's what happens, there's really no way that you can get these people out, especially because then they go into child, abuse inquiry and they go into the police force. They infiltrate everywhere and become an actual network. It's not just one person that's participating in abuse. It is a network. It's an organized systemic network of
Yep.
people that have grouped together and are harboring these secrets together and are committing these crimes together and covering them up together, and they persecute people like you and like Kevin and like all the other survivors that you have met and that have been lost to this cause. And like how you said, they gaslight you, they lie, they frame you in the media like you're the
Yep.
criminal, and they
Yep.
twist your story around so society thinks that you are the one that needs interrogated, that you are the criminal, that you are the black sheep, and that they're the ones protecting society from you
Yep.
instead of them showcasing that you guys are the heroes trying to protect society from the people that abused you.
Well, as I said before, as soon as I left the home, within a year, I went to the GP, tried to explain what had happened. First thing he did was put me on a script, prescription drugs that lasted 25 years. From then on, I'm now a drug addict. From a drug addict to becoming more dependent on drugs and then trying to go back and get him to listen, and he didn't. I'm only then going to my addiction's going to grow, and then the only way I'm going to live and be able to sustain that lifestyle is by committing crime. So when you start committing crime, and then you get involved with the police, and you try and explain to the police why you're in this situation, and you find that they too don't want to know, and then you go away and you've got no other option but to carry on with the life you've now got no choice to live, which is a life of crime. And then very, very quickly, what happens is you fastly become a career criminal, and then you're put in front of a judge who doesn't know anything about your background. Rather, before that, you go to a lawyer who, when you tell them what's happened or try and explain, the response 9 times out of 10 is, "Oh, just plead guilty. You'll only get a fine." And then you get a fine, and then you're now a convicted criminal, and you go in front of that judge, and this guy's never heard anything, doesn't know anything about you, other than you're a menace to society, and we must deal with you. We must get you off the streets. And this is what happens, and this is one of the things what I've been talking about a lot is, and especially in Scotland, if you are to, and again, this is not something that's going to happen overnight through the justice. When you talk about the justice system, but if you, for example, and we know this goes on, there's so many people in prison who have been gone through the revolving doors of addiction, crime, prison, and in many cases mental health institutions and early graves. Now, and many of these people then go on to have children of their own in between prison sentences who then can't live in a dysfunctional world, and they too end up in the care system. So we're creating this factory of people who have been abused and then turning them into career criminals. Now, what I said was, what would happen is, and I could name you probably 6 or 7. If you pick some of these law firms, right, these lawyers that deal, criminal lawyers, if you ask them 3 simple questions, right. If there's somebody who's been in and out of you've been in prison more than once, what age did they start committing crimes? Did they open up about child sex abuse? And what did you do about it? and you'll find, I know a man, probably more than one, who only sends a Christmas card to the lawyer because he's got no family. But this lawyer's making money out of him every time he commits a crime. He's paid his, you know. We in Scotland every month or every couple of months we get a new organisation coming up that's been devised by the government. Oh, we're starting this new RIVPMOS system. It's going to be helping criminals and people who are on drugs and people who are abused. It's a 10-year plan, and we're going to be pumping 16, 20 million into it. Well, it's okay for these people whose mortgages are going to be covered for the next 10 years. But what's the short-term plan to get these people off the drugs and off the streets and into some sort of normal functionality? Because these are the ones that you're abusing over and over and over again. And it's got to stop. You know, our trauma is treated as a crime and we're treated like pieces of dirt. I'm a good man. I'm a good man who's had a really bad life. But people want to punish me for that. You know? So that was my life when I was 16, living on the streets. That was my life for the best part of 25 years, hearing it and witnessing the same stories that I'd been involved in all my childhood. This has been my whole story, my whole life, about these young kids who turned up on the streets, you know. And then when I went into prison and I seen all these people who'd been through the same as me, when you've got more drugs in prison than you did on the streets. Some people wanted to go into prison because it was actually safer out there than it was on the streets. Because again, every time you turn for help, you get knocked back down on, you know, back onto the streets into a worse life before the, you know. So you learn through time. There's no point in speaking out. And the justice system are quite happy to treat you as a career criminal because there's always people going to be making money out of that. And the more people are making money, the more chance there is of it staying silent. And this is what happens over and over and over again. As I said earlier, but you said on the deduction, between 60 and 75% of all those people who are or were in prison were sexually abused, predominantly in the care system. Wait till you hear what happened when they put me in prison. You're not going to believe what happened to me when they told me you're not allowed to talk about child sex abuse in here because we've got too many victims. I said, I've been telling you that for 50 years. This is what they put me in prison for. And they said, listen, we understand. We're listening to you. People in here know who you are and what you've done, and we believe you. Why didn't they believe me? The judges and the lawyers and the charities and the police, who all treated me like a piece of dirt. It's unbelievable to think that you can go to a child abuse charity and you end up in prison. What? What kind of... That's North Korea stuff, Emma. You don't do that to somebody that's suffered in child so much in abuse, let alone my wife. You know, that was me for 16 years, for over 20 years. In and out of hostels, bedsits, derelict buildings, running between Northampton and London. When I used to shoplift, if I get caught, I'd know where to go. I'd then run to London and then back up again. I'd go to Leeds, I'd go to Sheffield, I'd go to Liverpool, run all my life, and running away as much from relationships when people tried to get to know me because I was hiding all these dark secrets, you know? And the miracle of all this is, and I praise God every day for this. And this is something I told you already. I'm talking. There's somebody when I was in Canterbury Cathedral a month ago, standing outside Canterbury Cathedral with a banner, "End all clergy abuse across the world." I've got introduced to somebody who's working with me now who wants to help me get a court case here to get this thing settled. And every time when you this is something that when you talk about what God's done in my life, this is the miracle. This is truly the miracle. I mean, I was a shoplifter. Yes, I did pickpocket one or two, and yes, I'm really. People say to me, "What's the worst thing you ever done, Dave?" I mugged an old lady when I was 16. One foggy autumn night, I ran by her, grabbed her bag. I remember what it had. It had £5, half bottle of whiskey, and a box of After Eight mints. That's when it probably the worst thing. I've never broke into somebody's house. I've never, you know, murdered any, or any, you know, my criminal record's really, really thin. I've got in a couple of fights, what we call drunken disorderly. I don't know what they call it in the States, but all these places I went to, and I used to get in trouble, and because I couldn't fit in anywhere. I was a social outcast and a social misfit. So it was easier just to keep running. And again, when anybody got close to me, even when I went in when I tried going a bed sit and trying to fit in somewhere, when it came to paying the rent, I would run because I need the money for drugs and alcohol. So you know, as I say, I'm not exaggerating. Over 100 houses and over 100 jobs, well over. Just all my life, running. And I had one or two relationships with girls, mostly drug related, where we would work with each other, shoplifting. But I'd never had a real girlfriend, anything like that. And as I say, a couple of times I went back to Scotland to try and get a relationship with my family. It just didn't. I'd last a weekend. And they say, "When are you going?" Because they couldn't handle me. I couldn't handle myself. Hyper Haggis was my name. Because I was just, you know, I was carrying all this trauma and this addiction, it was just incredible. Some of the stories of situations I got in, and I was in and out of prison. I went into prison 3 or 4 times, mainly, as I say, for shoplifting and getting in fights, drunken disorderly. And then what actually happened was, I mean, I'm sure there's so much more now that when later on, when I got in my bed, I was, oh, I should have spoken about that. As I say, I'm not wanting to take any notes because I want to be as open as I can to you to get an understanding. What happened was I met Alice. Alice was Scottish, and Alice didn't do drugs. She worked in Ladbrokes, the bookmakers. She worked in the betting office, and Alice had a bed sit in a shared housing. And we started going out for a drink, and we started going back to her house, and she only had a single bed, and she slept inside, I slept on the top. I didn't have any interest in sex or anything like that. I didn't, you know, I'm not saying I hadn't had sex, that would be a lie, you know. Yeah, I had, but Alice, she was my mate, and there was something about her, and she kind of, I don't know how to explain this without sounding big-headed. She thought I was the bee's knees. She thought I couldn't do anything wrong. She was almost 10 years younger than me, but she didn't ask any questions. She wasn't interested. When I took my drugs, I wouldn't take them when she was there. If I was injecting, I would get in the bathroom, or, you know, and I wouldn't smoke in front of her or anything like that. And then all of a sudden we started sleeping together. And then one day I went in, and I used to say to her, tell her about my life and things, and how I mean, I haven't spoke about how Thomas died. My brother died in prison, in Bedford prison, and other members of the families had died, and friends in prison had died, and just a lot of bad things had happened besides the home. And then one day Alice said to me, she says, "I've got something very important to tell you." Let's go on. And she started teasing me. And she was teasing me all day. And I said, "Come on." And I couldn't get it out of her. And she was all excited and jumping up. I thought she'd had a tax rebate and she was going to give me lots of money. That was just what I thought. I thought she's going to give me lots of money and say, "Listen, you can get as much drugs as you want." That was my mind at the time. And eventually she says to me, she says, "I'm pregnant." I said, "What? What?" I said, what do I do? I have no idea. I've never had a family. I don't know what, what do I do with this? What? I don't know what to do. And she says, "Yeah, I'm nearly 3 months pregnant." So I said, "Well, right, okay, I better go down tomorrow, book the wedding, and we'll get married." "Oh, great, that's fine." And I can tell you this, I haven't told many people this. I even went out and shoplifted her wedding dress because I had no money. I didn't have nothing. So I shoplifted her wedding dress. And I remember I used to always say to her, I used to always say to her, nothing better ever happened to you, because bad things have happened to me my whole life. Nothing. You want me? Oh, don't be silly. Come on, let's go out and have a drink. Let's go for a meal. Come on. You know, as I say, she was working. She had a wage, and I was just 6 stone shoplifter thing. You know, this sad life, and so yeah, so we got married on the 20th of April, 1997, 96, some around about that time. And there was only a couple of people there. And then we went to the pub, and then we went home, and that was it. And then a couple of times we went out, and then one night we went out, we went for a meal, we went for a drink, and she's still only 3 months pregnant now. And we went home, and in the morning I woke up. It was pitch dark, and she was lying on top of me. And I had my arms around her, and I felt her face, and her face was all cold. And I touched her, and she was a bit stiff. And I was like, what's that? So I got up my bed, I ran over, and I put the light on. And I don't usually talk about this because it gives people nightmares, but I'm going to talk about it now. When I looked over, she'd been lying on, her face was kind of stretched, and she changed colour. And I put it like this. This is the way I describe it. She looked like one of the Planet of the Apes. Just her face had all. You know, I found out later on she'd been dead for about 7 hours. But I ran downstairs. I ran out, and I ran, got the neighbour, and I said, "Can you help me? My wife's not well. Something's wrong. I'm not really sure." And this man came up, and he looked in. He said, "She's dead." I went, "No, no, no, no. Look, she's moving." So I was in shock. And the police came, the doctor came, they medicated me, and I was put back. As well as being in prison, I'd been put in mental hospitals as well. A few times I'd had breakdowns, and I'd been put in mental hospitals where they used to just stick Ligator up my backside to calm me down. Maybe I'd overdosed or something, you know. And yeah, they put me back in the mental hospital, and yeah, it was just the most incredible thing. And then what happened was I was in the hospital, so they've calmed me down, and I was ready to leave. I couldn't stay in the hospital. I think I ran away. And then what happened was, this is when the child abuse all started to resurface, Emma. Something happened. And I was in this flat, and something happened. And I started feeling all this shame and guilt and dirty. And I ran out, and I got lots and lots of amphetamines, and lots of vodka. I mean, in large quantities. And I was injecting, you know, an eighth at a time, which is a real serious amount of drugs. And eventually the police turned up, and they kicked the door in. And on the ceiling there was a light, like, just, I don't know, can you see my light from there? There was two. It was a long room, and one of them had been all caved in. It all plaster had all fallen, and the other one had a rope. So it was clear I'd tried to kill myself, and I was about to do it again. And they took me away. They took me into hospital, and this is when they sat me down. And I remember one of these doctors saying to me, "You've been through some stuff, mate. You know, but the only way you're going to change is if you want to change, you can change. You tell me all this." And he was telling me some things that was in the note. And I remember I got taken in a room by all these doctors, psychotherapists, psychoanalysts, psycho this, psycho that. And this guy says, "You're going to be here for a long time." He says, "What you've been through is more than a lot of people have been through." And I said, "Okay." And then I went back to my room. I was in a single cell room thing because I was a danger to myself and anyone else round about me, because I'd now thought at this point I was talking the kind of language that somebody years and years, centuries ago, somebody in my family must have done something bad to the gods or the devil, Satan's army, I called it. Satan's army must have taken over my family, and now, centuries later, I'm the one that's getting picked. So all this stuff that's happened to me is because one of my family centuries ago did something. And that's what I really believed. And that's when they took me in the hospital and they said, so what happened was I went back to my cell, and for obvious reasons, as you can imagine, I'd never prayed in my life ever. You know, to me, whenever I saw a priest, I ran. I couldn't communicate or nothing. But what happened was I got on my knees and I prayed and I said, if you're there, if you really, really do exist, I could do with your help. I said, I'm in a really scary place here. And I fell asleep. And then during the night, I heard this voice. And this voice says to me, if you do things my way, I'll make sure you get to heaven and you'll spend eternity with Alice and your child and your mother. If you go out and tell the world to put my children first and share your story, I'll give you everything you ever needed. Not wanted, but needed, which is very important because I wanted a fast car and lots of money and lots of drugs. But he said, no, you do things my way. So when I woke up the next morning, I woke up and the first thing I did was I started to breathe. And all of a sudden, when I shut my eyes, all I could see was a clear blue sky. What's happened to my asthma? What's happened to my stomach ulcers? Remember, I told you my brother died in prison. He died from stomach ulcers. My whole history of my family. And I'd been on so many tablets for stomach ulcers, you know, Zantac and so many different drugs. What's happened? What's going on? So I went to the window to have a fag, as I did every morning, and I put the cigarette in my mouth and I threw it away. And my hand to God, I never touched another cigarette since. So honestly, I've got all the records to prove it. And then I wanted to go outside because what had happened is because I knew how to work the system there. I'd sneaked in a bottle of vodka or got somebody to buy me a bottle of vodka, and I had it hidden in the gardens with all the, you know what the 10 days are? The 10 days are alcoholics who go into the mental hospital to dry out. So it's a dry out period. So that's the kind of area where I was in the mental hospital. So I knew how to get stuff in. And I went out and I picked the bottle up. Oh, and I gave it to somebody. I'm not going to say I never touched another drink, but I never touched another drink for about 20 years. And I walked out of there and I walked out into the ward and I bumped into one of the doctors. And he was a South African guy. And he said, how are you? What are you doing out your room? I said, something really strange. And I told him what had happened. And he says, you've been born again. I said, what? He says, you've been born again. And the first thing I could think was, I said, does that mean I get more unemployment money? He said, no. He said, but from this day on, your life's going to change in a very significant way. And he took me to the church and we sat down and we prayed. And I got up and I walked out and I had this great, massive urge to go into the wards and help people. I said, you want a cup of tea? Do you want a biscuit? And I just kept on helping people, and that's never left me. I now have this, I was born again, I had this new life. Everything I'd done in my previous life was gone. God had forgiven everything I'd done, all the crimes, the muggings, the shoplifting, everything. All I wanted to do now was to help people and share my story of what had happened. So I enlisted a theology, a tertiary college to study psychology and sociology. But I couldn't concentrate because God was talking to me and God was saying, no, you need to study the Bible. You need to slow down and learn to understand what I'm trying to say to you. So he said, I want you to go back to Scotland and I want you to enlist at the theology college in the north of Scotland. So I did. Now, this was 2001. This was when 9/11 had happened. Yeah, this was now 2021. I'd been to tertiary college. I'd been to other, and it didn't work. What I started do, oops, sorry. What I started doing was I used to look out for places that had evening schools for various psychology courses like rational emotive behaviour therapy, and then if they had a 10-week program somewhere near, maybe 20 miles away or 30 miles, I would enlist on it, and I would go, and I would take a sleeping bag, and I would enlist in the course in there. It was all nurses and psychologists and trainee psychiatrists, and then I would join it, and there's all these people thinking, who's this guy with the long hair and denims and jeans, and it was me. And then after I would introduce myself, I would tell them about my life, and very quickly the teacher would say, "We can use you. We can use you as a guinea pig for." And what would happen was I wouldn't tell them, but when the class was finished, instead of getting in a car or a bus going home, I would go and find somewhere to sleep, rough, because that's what I'd done. So I knew what I'd go and sleep there, and then in the morning I'd get the bus. But anyway, eventually I listened to God, and He said, "You've got to go to theology college." So I went up to Scotland, and I joined the theology college in Dingwall. And this is when I started learning about what God wanted for me, what God's plans were for me in my life, and how He wanted to use my story to help other people. And at the weekends, I started going out into cities, Edinburgh, Inverness, places, and I would find homeless people. And I could tell, I seemed to know the ones that had been sexually abused. I don't know what it was. And I was able to share my story, and I was able to talk, Emma, about the grooming process and how at the time they would make you feel good about giving them oral sex, how they groomed you that way. It made you feel, and even now, and even to this day, how sometimes you can get homosexual tendencies, but as long as you've got your Bible beside you, and then you can get rid of them. You're not going to get rid of them ever, but you can work through them. And people would say, "I've never met anyone like you. This is the kind of thing that we need. This is what we want to talk about," because so many people have so much shame about it, and they put themselves through this and go just downhill, downhill, downhill. And I was sharing this with the people in the church, people in the college, and then someone said, "We've got a notification." Certain thing me. Anyway, they invited me to go to Brazil. I said, "What?" They said, we've got a place in Brazil, and it's with Assemblies of God. Have you heard of them? Assemblies of God. It's a charismatic church. Yeah. And they wanted to invite me to go to Brazil, where they had this, it was a huge big tent. And they owned a piece of land beside this tent. And what they did is they went out at night time and found homeless people, and they would bring them back, clean them up, and find out if they had any family, children. They would go through the social services, reunite the families, and then beside the church tent, they would build little houses so they could live there. And I was invited to go out and share my testimony and just spend some time there. And this is when I told you about what when I had the deliverance with God, the experience I had. And even before I went out there, I just knew God was speaking to me, saying, "Prepare yourself, because something very, very big is going to happen out here, and you really need to be prepared." I said, "Yeah, I'm game for anything. You're the boss. Whatever you say goes. You've done all this, and by this time I'm floating with the love of Christ. My life just, I can't understand why every night I go to my bed, I'm lying in my bed, and I just feel this anointing. God's filling me up with this anointing and saying, "I'm going to use you, and I've got great plans for your life." And I'm like, "My God, this is incredible. This is just unbelievable." And I didn't know what was going to happen the next day, but I knew that with God's belief in God, and this new faith that I'd found, whatever's going to happen, it's going to be great. I just knew that. I just knew that everything bad that had happened in my life was in the past, and now I've got this. I'm this new person. So anyway, I went to Brazil, and what I met was just God taught me so many things, Emma, about love and about people. I remember when I got there and I just arrived. Now, you got to remember, even before I went there, I had to go out and buy new like sandals and shorts and t-shirts and things, and stuff, and towels. And, I'd never been on a bus, for God's sake. You're sending me over halfway around the world in an aeroplane. I'd never done anything like this before. This is just all, my whole life started going boom, 1,000 miles an hour. And I got to this place, and the people picked me up. This church picked me up. Dave, this is Pastor Eduardo, Pastor this and this. And we got back to this place. And as soon as I got there, this man came over. He said, tonight when you go to your bed, can you leave your shoes outside the front door so that I can clean them for you? I said, no, it's all right. They're brand new. It's okay. I don't need. No. He says, I want to. I want to serve you. I was like, wow. And this woman came up and says, can you leave your towel out each night? Just leave it outside your door and I'll clean it for you. And in the morning, when you get up, it'll be clean and dry. It's like, wow, this is strange. How nice. And then I found out very, very quickly, this man who wanted to do all this for me, he was the pastor. He was the head man. He wasn't the butler or anything like that. This man was the pastor. And he wants to do this for me, Dave Sharp, an ex-junkie, that he doesn't even know how. It just blew me away, Emma, to be that nice to people. And this is what God was teaching me about love, because I'd never had it. I didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to let people into my life or to get into other people's lives. I didn't understand what caring for somebody meant. I didn't understand what, being in someone's heart and letting somebody into your heart. I'd done it once with Alice, and it destroyed me. It just destroyed every trust I had, and that trust that had been destroyed in childhood by all these men and priests and stuff that left me totally broken. And I'm saying to myself, this is God working on me, because He knows I need. You can't just do this in a park in London. You can't just take me aside and have a little prayer in my ear in my flat. And I realised very quickly, God's working here. This is God really, really working. But I had no idea what was going to happen next. I had no idea. I just couldn't think for a minute that what was going to happen next. There was another Scotsman with me. I forget his name now, who spoke good Portuguese. I couldn't speak it at all. I learnt a little bit. But what happened was when we got there, and I gave my testimony at a couple of churches, and there was a couple of quite large churches that I spoke at, and I found that in Brazil that the love of God is just amazing. And sometimes you can be in church for 3.5 hours, and you don't have people there biting their nails and looking at their watch, none of that. They're so focused on God, and the love for God is just so special. Some of these people don't even have shoes. They don't have underwear. We were actually in the favelas, where there's no electricity, nothing. But they're so thankful for the love of God. And this is what I was experiencing. I was learning about materialism. I was learning about awareness. I was learning about gratefulness, about gratitude. I was learning about how to overcome and forgive. All these things I was learning through these people. And all of a sudden I was turning into a different person that was allowing these people into my life. And then what they did is they said to me, what would happen is every day, to make money, what they would do is, in order to build these houses, every day people would go out and do different work. Somebody would be on tin. So you'd be on a bike with no brakes. So you go around all the dumps and places and looking for bits of tin that you could sell to scrap dealers. Somebody else would be on plastic. So they go around all the rubbish tips looking for bits of plastic, build it up. That's how they made the money. And I'm sitting there, I've got hundreds of pounds in the bank. I'm thinking, no, I need to give them this. But then I'm realised, no, don't just let them. So this is how we did it. So every night we'd all meet and they'd put all the money together and say, right, we've got enough now to get windows, or we've got enough for a door. So this is one family, all coming together as one family, all these strangers all coming together for this one family to make their house. And it was just the most amazing thing I'd ever seen in my life, to be part of that. And you see the mum and dad and the kid, I mean, the room's probably, it's probably the size of a prison cell, but you can still get a bath in it and a sink and a bed, and it was just, they were, and I've got all the photographs. I've got lots of photographs of it. I keep them so close to my heart, and they became my second family, or my first family. And then what happened was, and this is the bit where, oops, sorry. This is when I talk about when I was asked or invited to go into the Amazon jungle. I was told there was going to be an all-night prayer session with dozens and dozens of churches. And as I say, I'd gave my testimony to a couple of churches, hundreds of people. I went on the radio station, and apparently I went out to like 5 million people. When I was speaking in English, somebody was speaking Portuguese. I was there for hours and hours and hours, and people were starting recognising me, and it was just like my home. And all they lived on, Emma, all they lived on was rice and beans. I remember one time there was a young girl, it was her birthday party, and everybody was all so excited. And they were picking up like old newspapers and making like decorations out of them, and how they adapted was just so. And you know what the main meal was for her birthday? Was hamburgers. What we eat every day. But they all got so excited. We're having hamburgers, because they had no money. It was just, they were just lived on the bare, but they had so much love for each other. And I remember if I wanted a cup of tea, I'd have all these women fighting over who's going to make me a cup of tea. I felt like Rod Stewart and George Michael, all these women fighting over me. But I found it was nothing sexual. It was just love. It was just amazing. And I started feeling like this as well, wanting to do, and as I said earlier on, when I came out of the hospital, all I wanted to do was help people. But I was kind of embarrassing myself because I didn't know when to stop. And people were looking at me a bit going, why is he this is in the hospital. And obviously when I've come out of the hospital, now God's shown me, he's taken me to the other side of the world to show me how love works, So anyway, they told me that they were going to go on an all-night prayer vigil in the jungle. And they wanted me to go. I thought, wow, my God. And I remember getting dressed up like Rambo, because they're going to be there all night. I've got a jacket and all this stuff. And all these women and men, they've got no shoes on, just a dress. And they're walking through the jungle, and I'm thinking, my God. And it's pitch dark. And we walked for hours. We got on the bus. I remember we got on the bus, and this is when it started, right? Now, I have to say here, right, there's people listening here may not know or believe what I'm about to say, okay? We know that. If you're a Christian, you'll know what a deliverance is. And let me just add as well, in places like Brazil, what I'm about to tell you happens on a daily basis. They do this every morning before breakfast. But it's something you never hear of, certainly over here. I'd never heard of it. So what I'm about to tell everybody now actually happened. How much you believe it is up to yourself. But again, this is my experience, and this is what happened. When I got on the bus, there were all guitars playing and everybody was singing. And all of a sudden, I felt myself being thrown back in my seat. And I felt this demon inside me. It was like a big, excuse me. Oh, I can feel it now. It's not there now, but it's easy to bring it back. It was like a big dragon, and there was two pillars either side, and it was chained to the pillars, and it was spewing fire. And I got terrified. I got really, really scared. And then all of a sudden I heard this bagpipe music. I thought, right, this is Scotland. This is God fighting back. So I've got to keep it together, be safe. All of a sudden, one of the pastors came over. Now, I hadn't made any signs, I hadn't shouted or anything. It's like he knew exactly what had happened. He said, are you okay, Dave? Yeah. You're going to be okay. You're going to be fine. Right, okay. So we're in the bus. It took hours to get there. So as soon as I got off the bus, I fell off. And it was like this dragon. And it was a fight going on. And this woman came over and she took my hand. She went, come on, in Portuguese. Hold my hand. You're going to be fine. So we walked through this jungle. No, I won't say hours now. It was hours and hours and hours. And she kept on looking and she said, you're going to be fine. So, and I had this fight going on inside, this huge big fight. And then all of a sudden we got to this clearing. Now, on the way, you can hear in the jungle hundreds of people all wailing, singing, praising God. All these different churches, all kinds of stuff, screams and wailing and songs of praise, everything. And then we got to this clearing and Bruce sat beside me and then everybody started getting on their knees and praying. So I got on my knees and this huge, and I was sweating. There's this huge big battle going on. And Bruce is beside me, and everybody's praying, everybody's screaming, there's so much going on. And then one of the pastors came over, and I've got my eyes shut throughout this whole thing. And one of these pastors came over and said, Dave and Bruce, open your eyes, look. And he had these leaves in his hand, but they were gold. And then he said, look at the floor. And on the floor, Emma, there's all these leaves, but they were all gold. It was like a disco. You know, when you go into discos in the 70s. And I went, oh my God, what is going on? I wasn't scared. I wasn't scared. It's just that the presence of God was there. This was something truly I'd never read about or heard about or imagined. And everybody started praying again. And then what happened was these pastors, they got all the women to stand up. And they got the women to stand in a circle. So all the women stood in a circle and he went round and shut their eyes. And then he went over to one and he touched her and she fell back and started falling about. And then he did it to somebody else. And I'm looking going, right, this is a bit, what's going on here kind of thing, you know. I'm going to get. And then he did it with all the men. Put all the men round. And then he went all the way round. I'm standing there. And as soon as he got to me, he went, Dave, how are you feeling? I said, well, listen, I've got this thing going on. There's this battle. And I told him what had happened. I said, I have this dragon, this evil dragon inside me. And it's trying to escape. And it's on these two pods, these two, like Samson, what do you call them, pillars. And then all of a sudden he invited everybody. Everybody, come on, stand round Dave. So everybody stood round me. Everybody's got their hands on me. And everybody's praying. And then all of a sudden, oh, wow. I felt this wind, this huge, huge wind. And all of a sudden I heard, and I fell to the floor. And I just lay there. Couldn't hear nothing. Couldn't see nothing. My eyes were closed. And that's when, as I told you before, I just started seeing the whole Bible. Like I was in the Bible. I was in different places. I seen Moses crossing the river, the sea. I was looking at seeing people's sandals, who the sandal was broken. And I remember thinking, and I got my Bible now, and I look and go, that was him. That's him whose his sandal was broken. Little things like that. Every detail was just like in 4D, 4K. Just so a brightness and a realism that was just, it was like it was like I was being levitated, but I wasn't. I was lying on the floor and carried in levitation through the Bible like this. And then at the very, very end, when it got to the end, I went all through Revelations, all the different demons and gods and angels, everything. And then all of a sudden, there was this whiteness. And it's a whiteness that you can't describe. You can't describe this to anybody. It's hard, but this is heaven, what we've got to look forward to. And this is where Alice was. And I just knew it. She was there, and my mum was there, and all these people that I'd over, so many people, even footballers and pop stars and everything. It was just all, they were all there. I couldn't see them, but I knew this is where we're going, where I'm going. And then I woke up, and we all stopped, and we got back on the bus, and nobody spoke to me. Everybody just left me, and I sat on my own. Bruce, my mate, he was somewhere else. And I was numb. I was just quiet until we got back. And when we got back to the place, I went straight to bed. Didn't speak to anybody. And one of them, one of the women took me in as if to say, "You're okay." They knew what was happening. So I lay on the bed. Apparently I was there for 3 days. And again, it was just like all this anointing, Emma. The Holy Spirit was filling up in me. And all this old evil stuff, all the evil that had happened to me just disappeared, just went. And after 3 days, I remember there was one of the girls, one of the women's daughter, she was in a brass band or something, and I was invited to come along. And I went to this place, and I saw things. I saw this woman that was pregnant, but she didn't look pregnant. Some things were happening. And I've been to churches where people stand up and say, "Well, no, somebody here's got leukemia." And sometimes you don't believe it. These ones that you get on the TV channels that are all just making money. Well, I was kind of seeing things like that. I was kind of seeing things. But then what happened is very, very quickly, realism set in that I've got to go back to Scotland. I've got debt. I've got a home to run. I've got all this, So I've gone from being up here, where I'm still am, but now I've got to prepare myself for leaving here, which I knew was going to be so hard because I couldn't. This is where my life was now. I was only been there a couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, but there was nowhere else existed. But I was living in Scotland, and I had somewhere. I was living in a flat. I had to go home at some time. And sure enough, when I went home to my flat, and there was mountains of bills, and I can't remember if I had a job or not. But I remember God saying to me, God spoke to me, and He says, "I want you to go back to England. I want you to be prepared. I want you to get ready." He says, because things are going to happen. He said, you have to trust in me, and you have to live in faith. And that's what I did. And I knew at that point that God has something very, very special lined up for me and for all survivors. So when I came back, that's when I started trying to get jobs, but I still had my own problems, Emma. I still wasn't. God doesn't cure you of your illnesses. He gives you a path out. He shows you the way. And it's up to you to live in faith and to learn the way through the Bible and through the love and through God's timing. And again, everything happens in God's time. Once you learn God's timing and to learn to understand it, then, and be patient, God will use you in the most incredible way. But He'll also test you. And again, this is when I came back, I went back to England. And that's when I started to campaign, and I started going to London. I started going to various other places where I hear, and I found out if there was any child abuse rallies or campaigns, I would turn up. And various things happened. In 2004, the Scottish Prime Minister, or the First Minister, made a very big statement about child sex abuse. And at that time, we had a lot of people turning up in England who were Scottish, who were survivors and family members of survivors. But when he made this statement, it kind of changed everything, and a lot of things went quiet. But I was still doing a lot of stuff. I was still turning up at these rallies. I remember standing up in the English Parliament. Have you ever seen the size of that place? The Parliament in
Online, I
London.
haven't, not in person. I've just seen like pictures and stuff. It
There's
does
like
look
three.
huge.
There's like 3,000 rooms there. You know, it's huge. And I remember there was a big rally across the road from it once, and it was all child abuse survivors and campaigners. But things got out of hand. And I remember a lot of people started running onto the road and stopping all the traffic, and the police were there. And this was the first time I'd experienced any sort of resistance in the sense of political, up until then it'd all been peaceful and just sort of exchanging stories and things. And I remember there was a microphone and everybody was standing there. And I grabbed the microphone, and I don't know how I did it, where I got the strength from it. But I remember standing up, and there was about 300 people there, I guess, something like that. Maybe not that many. But I remember standing up and I said, listen, everybody. I said, see over there in that building, in one of those rooms, is the person that we need to talk to who's going to help us. Do you think they're going to open the door if you are doing this and obstructing the police? And then all of a sudden, half the people there went with this other group who were causing all the trouble, and half went to me. People come over to me, what's your name? And this was me. This was my birth into campaigning, if you like. And people were starting saying, you talk a lot of sense, and this is when I started getting more prominent, started finding more people who the same ideas, and started meeting more Scottish people. And then I found more people who had been through the same experience as me. And this is when it all really, really kicked off. This is when it all started happening until, as I say, 2010, when the Pope came over. And that's when everything changed. Everything changed because most of the people I'd met were from the care system, and 90% of the care system abuse was from the Catholic Church. And that's when I started getting banners. That's when I started specifically aiming for clergy abuse. I started turning up at different rallies. And then shortly after that was when I went to the police, and they finally started believing me. And because what had happened is, going back to 1997, after Alice died, when I was in the hospital, the people in the hospital said to me, they said, we knew you were a child abuse survivor, but every time we tried to talk about it, you ran away. We know, we've seen your medical records, we know, and now I'm prepared to talk about it. And I remember saying to them, let's do this without drugs. Let's talk about it instead of keep injecting me up the backside with Ligacto. You're not going to get anything out of me that way, you know. I remember somebody saying there was one time somebody went round and they got this on my records where I was impersonating a Hoover. That's how insane I was. I was in the hospital and I was a Hoover. I thought I was a Hoover. Don't ask me to explain that, but this is how my insanity had gone so many times during the years of addiction, and getting myself into situations that were just so out of control. Seeing all these young kids taken off the streets, finding people dead next to me in the derelict buildings, it's just horrible, horrible life of misery and sadness, and now I've got a purpose. Now I've got a reason to live, and now I've got a campaign, and now I've got God behind me, and things are happening. I'm not doing drugs, I'm not drinking, but I'm still carrying all that trauma, Emma. Because, as I say, God doesn't take all the trauma away. God just gives you the tools to use it to make it better for His will. And that's what I did. And I started giving my testimony out in all these different places, speaking all over the country. And then, as I say, in 2010, I went to the 2010 or 11 was when I went to the police, and they actually believed me. And then what they told me was, one of the police officers told me, he said, do you know that we've checked you out? And we've found you've walked into police stations And we've got you in register in 6 or 7 different other cities and towns where you've gone in, and many people have done this, where you go and I want to talk about it, but then you've walked out and never went back. So they don't come looking for you. That's what I'm saying about child abuse survivors, how they spend their whole life running. And what we're talking about now is we need to start creating an environment where we can make survivors feel safe enough to come forward. That's what's missing. That's again why with this man I'm talking about in London, I'm sitting with this guy now talking about how can we change safeguarding to bring people back into the church. If you take the abuse aside first, sorry, if you take the abuse aside first and work on bringing these people back into the church, into the working family, and then and only then will they feel safe enough to open up. So putting your Christianity first, because I'm fed up. I'll be really honest with you. I'm fed up, and we've seen it now since the Canterbury Cathedral thing. We've got so many people who are on Twitter and on other social. I just do Twitter. There's so many people, Emma, who tell us that they've been called by Christ, but they've got the LGBT logo, and they want all. They believe that women. There should only be women bishops, and all the men should be out. Sorry, you're not called by our God. You're not reading the same Bible we're reading. Sorry, So it's about sitting down with these people and saying, what is your vocation? What is your ministry? If your ministry is called to God and safeguarding, you must be able. You've got to understand that you need to bring these people back into the church and then deal with the abuse. And a couple of people said to me, we've never heard people talking like that. I said, because you're not opening your doors and you're not opening with your heart. Once you open with your heart and let these people into your life, if you're living in the right ministry, we can do anything. We can rip this whole child abuse thing apart if only we work together through Christ. It's that easy. It's only through faith. It is possible. I refuse to think otherwise, because I am that messenger, and there's hundreds of us. You're one as well. No matter how many people tear our stories apart, no matter how many people try and criminalise us, no matter how many people try and use us for their own personal and political gain, in the very end, when they get to heaven, we're all going to get asked the same question. Did you put my children first? I'm going to be able to say I did. Are you? Yes, you are. Of course you are. And that's a very, very special, magnificent, powerful gift that you've been given by God. There's nothing more powerful than God's children. Nothing. And to see people abuse that and exploit that. One of the biggest things I dealt with in my life after Alice died, I had so much therapy, Emma, but one of the biggest things I had to deal with was my anger. Only once I dealt with my anger was I able to move on. Forgiveness is separate. But once I dealt with my anger, and in some ways, I'm going to say it makes me angry. in some ways, it frustrates me so much, because there is such a thing as a righteous anger. But again, it's about when you put yourself in front of these people who are abusing and exploiting children, and God's got your back. You don't have to get angry. You want to. I would love to get angry. I remember I was in one therapy session where I got taken in a room, and it's an actual house, and it's got a television and a fridge and a cupboard, but it's all balsa wood. And you go in and smash it up. You literally smash it with your bare hands. Because before I'd done that, one of the old things in the old days when I got angry, I used to smash my furniture up, because I don't want to hit human beings. This is before I was born again. This is the old life. Somebody upset me, because I've never been violent in that sense of hurting people. It's again, it's just I still say to this day, God has been looking after me a lot longer than I realised. Amen. You know, and it's just such a blessing. It just fills me with so much joy to be that witness. It's just an incredible. And here's the thing as well. As I was trying to say earlier on, when I had the false allegations made against me, Emma, I was terrified. I was terrified because you see so many of these documentaries, a mind of a serial killer, and you see so many times, and I could name a dozen. You could as well, where they come on. They were prominent figures in their life until something happened in adulthood that triggered them, and all of a sudden they became serial killers because what triggered them was to do with the child abuse that they suffered. So something happened in adulthood that made them trigger them, and they took like Ted Bundy, the other one, the clown man, what's his name? All them. They all abused in childhood, but they managed to live a life, a successful life, and then something happened in adulthood that made them snap. I was, and here's the thing, I was very, very public about this. I emailed and wrote to Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish Prime Minister, the head of police, the head of the psychiatry team. I said, listen, this has happened to me. I have no assurance. I can't assure that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow and something going to happen. I was terrified because I'd put so much trust in these people who then did this to me. You don't know how you're going. And I was waking up during the night having nightmares, screaming this woman's name, and we had to have a meeting with the neighbours to explain what had happened. And yeah, and that's why I'm on suicide watch now. But as I say, let me go back a touch and see if I can go back to when I started the campaigning. I started standing outside the Scottish Parliament. First time was in 2012 or 13. As I say, I'd already been to the police. I'd knew dozens of men had come forward. Lots of people. I was now in the papers all the time. I was known as the #1 child abuse campaigner in Scotland. And during the referendum, the 2014 Scottish referendum, I stood outside the Scottish Parliament. There was thousands and thousands of people there. Yes and no. You remember the referendum? We want a referendum. No, we don't. Yes, no. And I pulled out a huge 16-foot banner and I put it up and it said, forget the referendum, look after your children first. And people turned around and went, who are you? What's this? Nobody had ever seen anything like that before. And people started coming over and I'd share my story. And they'd say, I was abused as well. Can I help you hand out some leaflets? So they, instead of doing the political campaigning, they would come over and join us. And what I would do is I had no money. I was on dole. I was on benefits. But quite often what started happening is, like I say about the coffins and things like that, I started receiving phone calls and emails, the most horrific things. There was one example. I'll give you this one example. I received this phone call from a guy. He had an American accent. And he said, are you Dave Sharp? I said, yeah. He said, I got your number from so-and-so. I've seen you in all the papers. He said, I was in St Ninians as well. Me and my brother, my younger brother, were in St Ninians at the same time as you. He says, did you used to get taken to the brick factory? I said, yes, that's right. What used to happen is we'd get sent out to work in brick factories. Now, I didn't happen to me a lot, but I think it happened to the older boys. But obviously, I was one of the ones that wasn't allowed out. I think I did go a couple of times, but I can't be sure of that. But what used to happen is, he said, me and my brother used to get taken to the brick factory. And he said, when we came home at night, we get a bath, and then Ryan and these other men would sexually abuse us. He said, what happened was, when he was 18, he contacted the Catholic Church or the Christian Brothers, and he told me this story. He said a meeting was arranged, and he was asked to go to a hotel in Edinburgh where two men met him. Now, I never asked them if they had priest collars, so I'm not sure, right? But these two men said to him, we know that your family's in Canada, right? You've got family in Canada? The guy said, that's right. He said, well, listen, here's what we're going to do. we're going to pay for your flight to Canada. You go to Canada. If you ever come back to Scotland, you'll be murdered. You and your brother. And this is in January. It's either 2014 or 2000. I had a big breakdown in 2015, so it could have been 2015 where I ended up in a mental hospital. This man says to me, he says, Dave, I've been in Canada ever since. He said, my young brother died just before Christmas without ever seeing Scotland again. Can you get justice for us? Now, can you imagine that burden to carry? And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, I've got to do something. I've got to do something. So what I used to do, Emma, I used to look around my flat and I say, right, I'll sell my television or I'll sell my stereo. And I used to go, I told you I live a mile from the motorway. So I'd do a sign, Glasgow or Edinburgh, and I'd hitchhike up. And what I would do is I would find in Edinburgh, as with most big cities around the world, you have a lot of these backpacker hostels. Yeah. Now, in these hostels, most of these hostels, what you have is a room that's called long stay. Now, they're either in the attic or down in the basement. Now, this is usually men who are homeless, drug addicts, but they give them a bed in return for working in the hostel. So they'll make the beds, wash the dishes, do the housework and things. So I would go in, and if you ask for a room in the long stay, instead of costing £20, £30, you get it for like £2 a night. So I would say to them, okay, can I book a bed for 5 nights? So I give a tenner. That's me for 5 nights. Now, these, as you can imagine, were not nice places. These were not nice places. You had probably 6, 8 bunk beds in this little room. They're all addicts. They're all homeless. It stank. It stank. Every night they would take the fire alarm out and they would all sit smoking heroin, smoking drugs, injecting. So, but this was my people. This is who I grew up with. This is my life. So I would go in, and at night time would sit, and I didn't do drugs, didn't drink, but I would get a drink, a bottle of vodka or something, put it in the middle of the room, and I'd share my story with these people. And I'd tell them, and I'd say, tomorrow I'm going to cross the road to the Scottish Parliament and I'm going to stand there for 8 hours giving out these leaflets. Okay. And in the morning when I woke up, I've got a thing beside my bed. I say every morning, I've got an A4 piece of paper in my bedroom, and on it is the first thing I see every morning, and it says, "Dear God, help me to find someone today who needs your support the way that you support me." And then I get up out my bed, I go into the kitchen, I put the kettle on, put a tea bag in the cup, and I go to the fridge, and on my fridge door I've got a sign that says, "Dear God, help me to find someone today who needs your support the way that you support me." So then I go into my bedroom and I open the cupboard and I've got all these lovely clothes, and I go in the bathroom and I brush my teeth and I comb my hair, and then I go to my front door, and beside the front door I've got this sign that says, "Dear God, help me to find someone today who needs your support the way that you support me." So every time I leave my flat, Emma, everything that I am or was is behind me. All I have is who I am and what I'm carrying, which is the word of God and his love for the people. And that sees me through. So when I'm in this place where no one else would dare go, and in the morning I used to wake up and I'd say this prayer, and then all of a sudden one or two of the guys would come over and say, "Can I talk to you, Dave?" "Yeah, go on." "I was abused as well." So they would share their story, and I would say, "Why don't you come with me?" And what? You want me to come with you? Why don't you come and share your story? Share your story with the public and tell them what's happened and how you're trying to get help. Well, okay. And by the end of day 3 or day 4, I've got like 5 people. And me standing outside the Scottish Parliament handing out leaflets. And the next thing they're coming over me and say, I've got an appointment with my GP. I want to see a psychiatrist. What church do you recommend I go and join? So I'm turning people, saving lives at the same time, and just doing God's work. And it works every time, you know. And more and more, I then started turning up at the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church, setting up a stall and doing a vigil to remember all those children whose lives were taken or lost because of clergy abuse. And more people started joining us. And this went on for a good 5 or 6 years. But what happened is earlier on, around 2013, there were so many people dying, Emma, that I couldn't cope with the amount of, I wasn't getting any help myself. And I was hearing so many stories. And this is sort of roughly about the same time as the Scottish Government started doing away with all the rehabs. So it was kind of at the same time. And there was a lot of people started dying in Scotland from drug addiction and suicides. There had been a lot for years and years, but all of a sudden it was becoming more public. And I was in the thick of this in the sense that I was on the streets hearing stories and seeing people who were suddenly disappearing. And by 2015, as I said earlier on, I had like 20 odd people. So what I did was I reached out to all the child abuse charities. And I'm asking all these charities, I said, I need some help, I need some counselling, and I need some support. And that's when this charity came forward, the charity that, I won't mention the name, but the charity that did this thing to me, right? So, hang on, sorry. So I got allocated a key worker, and she became a friend. And again, I live in England, so it was mainly phone calls, but whenever I went up to Scotland, I would go down to the charity and I'd get to meet other people. And then I was still campaigning, and some of these other survivors would say, can we come out with you? I said, of course you can. The more the merrier. We can actually share our stories and encourage other people to come forward. And that's what happened. And we became very, very good at it. And we got a lot of publicity. But I didn't meet the chief executive for some time. I'd heard about her. I knew she was in a lot of confrontation with she was more of a political activist than a chief executive of a child abuse charity. And then in 2015 or 2016, I met her she held a meeting in Glasgow, and she was telling everybody that the Scottish Government was trying to shut the charity down, which we all thought was a bit strange. Why would you share that burden with survivors? Why do you feel the need for us? We don't need to know that. There's some old women here that this is going to make them quite scared. And this became a regular thing. It seemed to be a lot of bad publicity and stuff like that, you know. And whenever we started doing campaigns, she would turn up, and sort of the leaflets we were giving out for various organisations, she didn't want us doing this, and it became quite obstructive. Anyway, so in 2016, I'd contacted the Christian Brothers and the Catholic Church and the Scottish Government, and I was deep in conflict, trying to get justice for myself and for other survivors. I'd contacted the Catholic Church and I said, I want you to set up a counselling service, a Christian counselling, so that we can come forward and have our voices heard. I want to also meet the people who did the things to me, the Christian Brothers, and I was ignored. So I prayed about this, and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed, and God said to me, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go up to Scotland, to the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church, and change yourself to a 10-foot cross and stand outside the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church for 10 days. I thought, man, don't be stupid. I'll get killed. Can't do that in a city like Glasgow, which is so religious. But this thing wouldn't go away. And God was speaking to me, said, this is what you're going to do. Now, I'd done lots of campaigns all over the UK, outside churches and things like that, but nothing like this scale, and not in Scotland either. Mainly it was just vigils or campaigns outside the Parliament and the city centres. But this was something different. And so I contacted the police, and the police said, please don't do this, Dave. No, this is too dangerous. We can't stop you, but we're asking you. I said, well, I'm going to do it. So sure enough, I did. And I I got a cross, 2 pieces of wood, put it together. I chained myself to the cross and I stood outside the Catholic Church, the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church in Glasgow. And I stood there for 10 days. And dozens of people came forward to say that they'd been abused. Lots of people from the church came forward to say that they knew what we were doing and they understood what we were doing. And people were telling me, this is what we need. We need survivors like you to come forward to tell the church that we need to stop this. We need to confront this together as a community and as a church. But the church kept on sending out these weird messages like, to all our parishioners, please avoid this man outside the church. This man's got serious mental health issues. And this only upset people even further, Emma. People who were involved in the church got quite offended by this. I knew exactly this is what I was used to. You know, there was other occasions when I'd contacted the same church, and I went into them and I said to them, I said, listen, I'm having these nightmares about chaining myself to the gates of this church and setting myself on fire. I need counselling. Can you help me? And they'd say, okay, leave it with us. We'll get back to you. No sooner had I left the church and I'm walking down the street, my phone went and it was the police. But the funny thing was, it was the police that I knew. I knew the police officers because I'd been working with them. And they says, Dave, don't get angry, but we just have to tell you what's just happened. I said, well, what's happened? He said, the safeguarding team from the church has just phoned us to say that you've threatened to go into the church and chain yourself to the altar and set yourself on fire. I said, that's satanic. That's not what I said. And this police officer, who was a friend of mine, Dave, listen, he says, we believe you. He says, because we get this all the time. The Catholic Church making up stories. It's happening all the time. I said, I would never, ever say something like, why would I go into a church and tell them I'm going to chain myself to the altar? It's completely satanic. But anyway, what happened was, after 10 days, they never came out. So I sent a message saying, I'm going to stay here for 40 days and 40 nights. And all of a sudden, everything changed. Everybody panicked. This guy's serious. Because nobody knew what I was going to do next. This is one of the things about my campaigning. But then what happened was the Christian Brothers suddenly sent me an email, a very, very long email, admitting everything they'd denied. And they said they wanted to have a meeting. So, cut a long story short, a meeting was set up in Manchester. And that's when I said I went to this meeting and I ended up getting less than £100,000. But I decided then, whatever money I get, I'm going to start my own group called S.A.F.E, Seek and Find Everyone Abused in Childhood. So that's what I did. And I contacted this charity and I said, listen, can you imagine if a group of survivors like us go on the streets and you come with us, the charity, use your counselling skills, and we can help so many people and refer them to the police and to the child abuse inquiry. So that's what we did, Emma. And it worked. It worked. We were doing amazing. Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, Greenock. We went into Gay Pride for the weekend. The things we heard in there, I've never been so far out my depth than I was in Gay Pride. But the managers, the people who actually organised the Gay Pride, came over to me and they're saying things like, we've never seen anything like this. This is amazing. And we had people there this is in Glasgow, there was people there from Liverpool, Manchester, other places coming up and saying, can you come down to us, Manchester Gay Pride, and do it there? But I was only focusing on Scotland. But it was an amazing success. Walk for Suicide. We set up a stall there, and all these people who were on suicide watch coming over and shit, and we were able to tell them, here's a charity here, a child abuse charity that will help you. They can help you. But what very, very quickly happened, Emma, was people started telling me, you've got to be careful, Dave. A lot of people don't like what you're doing. You're too good at this. You're revealing too much. You know too much about what's happening in Scotland. But there's a lot of people also jealous of what you're doing. A lot of people who are sitting at home who have never been able to come out and talk. And they're jealous because you're doing the work that they want to do. And I understood it. I understood everything. I used to come back to my house after doing a campaign. I'd be on my knees crying because in my flat where I'm now, I'd be on my knees crying because I had to soak up all the stories I'd heard and all the threats I'd received and the stuff that people would go to harm children and the stuff that people would do to exploit survivors. It was all building up, Emma. It was just so hard to think that in a small Christian country like Scotland, this was going on. And then what happened was one day, completely out of the blue, I knew this woman, I knew this chief executive. She'd been on, it wasn't no secret, she was on national television complaining about the child abuse inquiry. She was complaining about the police, which is where you talk about John Wedger. She was complaining about the police. She was complaining about um, the Scottish government. I found out later she's actually a Labour councillor at the time, which stunned us all. She gets funded by the Scottish government, it's SNP government, but she's actually a Labour councillor. I thought this, so it always started, everything's starting to unravel. And then she started saying to me, "We don't want you to direct people to the inquiry." I said, "Well, where do we direct them then?" And then she introduced me to her lawyer. This is the law firm that works with this charity. And she said to me, "We want them to come as well on the streets we use." And I thought, you know what, that's a fantastic idea. Because as well as giving counselling, we can also give them legal advice. What a great idea. I was so naive. I didn't realise they were setting me up to fall. They were setting me up to take over what I was doing. People were warning me. Lots of people were trying to tell me, "You need to be careful, Dave. You're too naive. You've been on the streets too long." What I also noticed, Emma, when I started doing jobs, I call it being under the water and on top of the water. And again, yeah, I mean, when I told you about how I've been stabbed 3 times and had hit by an axe, when you live on the streets, you know the rules, right? You take your life in your hand every day, every time you leave the house or every time you go to bed at night. What I started when I started working and trying to fit into society and get a job in a call centre, everybody, the managers used to say, "Been listening to your calls. You're ever so kind. You're such a nice person, and keep up the good work and all this, you know." And very quickly, I was getting a pay rise, but I couldn't understand. I honestly couldn't understand why people didn't like me because I was doing well. I didn't understand that jealousy thing, and I'm saying to myself, "Hang on a minute, you've got a house and family, and you've got you've got all this. I've got nothing. But you think I'm better than you? I'm not better than you." I couldn't. That's all the things that used to confuse me, you know, because I was living in a bedsit or something, or you know, and I was just it was just so strange. I couldn't. But anyway, now this charity now was asking me things, telling me things that they wanted me to do, and I said, "No, no, 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 no. I'm doing it this way." So then what happened is one day this woman, and the woman who was my key worker, they took me in a room and they said, "We've had a complaint that you threatened someone, so you need to leave. We don't want you in this charity any longer. We don't want you talking to any of the survivors or any of the staff." I said, "What do you mean? Sorry, who have I threatened? No, we're not going to talk about it. Don't ever, ever contact anybody in this charity again. Now get out." And I left and I thought, strange, very strange. Now, what else had happened, what I haven't told you is, they started involving other groups who weren't regulated or registered charities. And these other people started turning up at our events and they were scaring some of the survivors. And this woman was telling us, "Well, you need to," and these people were asking survivors for their phone numbers and things. And I thought, no, 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 something not right here. So the police officers that we were working with to help us promote to go to the police, we told them, we phoned the police and said, "Listen, this isn't right." And other people phoned, and I was told by the police that these people were under investigation for other stuff. So what happened is, me from being a whistleblower to now this woman who I think is my mentor, who's got my back, who's looking after me as a survivor, she's now turned on me. You've no idea how much what that feels like, Emma. You've got no idea. To take me in a room and say, as soon as they did it, I realised right away, all right, they're trying to get rid of me now. So this is, and I was heartbroken. I was I was devastated. Everything I'd worked so hard all these years, I'd turned my whole life around. 30 years I'd been clean after Alice died. I'd turned my whole life around. I had all this money and I was putting it all. We were going to Dundee. I was paying for all the hotels. I was paying for everybody's transport. I paid for everything in the hotels and lunches, and because it worked. And I didn't ask for anything in return. And now all of a sudden, they want me out because they want it done their way. Or they want to do it different. But I don't want. And they want these other people to join as well. We don't want any more people. It's working the way it is. Leave it. And then she asked me to leave. But then I had all these people phoning me, including police officers. Don't you dare stop what you're doing. Don't let these people stop you. And then I had people from the group, the survivors group, survivors saying, we've just been told not to talk to you ever again, that you did really bad things. I went, wait, who's telling you this? This woman. I said, I don't even know what I've done. She said I threatened somebody. I've never seen, they've not showed me any evidence or nothing. So I refused to give in, Emma. So I phoned everybody. I phoned other charities. I phoned the police. I phoned everybody. I said, this is not right. You can't do this. And then I heard so many people who were also coming out saying that they didn't believe what had happened to me. They were thrown out as well. And then I had members of staff phoning me saying, Dave, I need to tell you my experience. I was getting bullied. I had false allegations made against me as well. And then all this stuff started piling up about things to do with this one charity. But then it got even worse. If it couldn't get any worse, this is after about a year. And then one day, I'm at my house, and my door went, and it's two police officers. I've come all the way 400 miles from Scotland. And they says, Dave, you need to come with us. I said, what do you mean? You need to come up to Scotland. We need to talk to you about all these emails and stuff you've been sending. You're not being arrested. We just want to chat with you. We'll take you up now. This is at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And we'll interview you and we'll bring you back down. You don't even need to bring any change of clothes or any money. We'll bring it. I thought, no, this doesn't seem right. There's something not right here. So anyway, I got in the car, and on the way up, and they're talking away, and I've got my CPTSDs kicked in now, so I'm in my ADHD. I've gone into hypervigilance, and I couldn't stop talking. I was just rabbiting. But I remember saying at least 3 times to them, I said, listen, please, if you're going to keep me up here or put me in a cell, you have to make sure I've got an appropriate adult. You must make sure I've got an appropriate adult that understands my psychological needs. Don't put me in a cell because I spent so many times in coffins. And the guys were just laughing. These police officers, and one police officer looked round and said, when do you ever shut up? And I said, you don't understand what's happening here, do you? I said, you've got to be very, very careful. So anyway, I got to the police station and they just changed. Everything changed. And they grabbed me, put me in front of the sergeant's desk. And the sergeant said, right, first of all, we're going to take your fingerprints. I said, well, hang on a minute. If I'm not being arrested, why do you want to take my fingerprints? He said, you're getting your fingerprints. No. I said, well, hang on a minute. Stop right there. So I took my hearing aids off. I said, right, that's it. I said, listen, I'm not going to say or do another thing until you get me a doctor or take me to hospital. I'm not saying anything. So the 2 guys grabbed me, turned me around, took me in a cell and stripped me naked. And then they gave me this metal suit thing, anti-suicide thing, put this on, and then they left me there. Oh, yeah. Now, this is like 1 o'clock in the daytime. A couple of times the door went and I just turned my back. Honestly, I thought I was going to get raped. all of a sudden, my 12-year-old child's come back, and I'm back in the home, and I'm under the desk, and I'm going to be abused all over again. And these people have no understanding of what they've just done. And then at 8 o'clock at night, the door went, and it opened up, and the police were there, and there was a doctor. And this doctor took me in a room, and he had a laptop. And I said to the doctor, so before you say anything, I said, can I please just ask you, can you just Google Dave Sharp, Scottish Child Abuse Inquiry? So he did. He opened it up, and you know what the first thing he said to me was, have you been offered an appropriate adult? And I said, no. He said, you need an appropriate adult. So he took his laptop, went away. I got up, I walked back into the cell, and those two police officers were in the cell. Are you ready to talk? I said, hang on a minute, have you spoke to the doctor? No. I said, I'm not talking to you. So they went away, and that was me from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock the next morning. I didn't even get a drink of water. I wasn't given a cup of tea, no food, nothing. A couple of times they came in, and I couldn't look at them, so I couldn't hear what they said. And I just thought they're going to grab me, rip my clothes off, and rape me. That's all I thought, Emma. Then at 7 o'clock in the morning, the door went, and this officer would come in. He said, right, threw a bag in with all my clothes on. He says, right, get your clothes on. We're leaving in 5 minutes. You're going to court. I said, what? What do you... I said, hang on a minute. Do you realise I haven't even had a cup of tea in 16 hours or something? Haven't had anything to eat, nothing. Oh, okay. So he went away and he came back with one of the microwave dinners, piping hot sausage and beans, and I couldn't eat it, and a cup of tea. He said, right, you've got 5 minutes. I said, hang on a minute. How am I going to... Can I comb my hair? How can I brush my teeth? And all these clothes are all wrinkled. What you can't... I can't help you with that. So he came in, handcuffed me, put me into one of the meat wagons with the little holes that you sit in, the little, you know, the ones that the prisoners get taken in. A 2.5 journey up to this place called Alloa, and I'm put in another cell, and I'm left there, and I said to this officer, I said, you know, it's 12 o'clock in the daytime. I haven't had anything to eat since yesterday morning. A slice of toast. He went away and he came back with a pot noodle. So I had a pot noodle, and he says, your lawyer's going to see you in a minute. I said, okay, right. I said, I've no idea what's happening. And it was 3 o'clock. He's right, come on, you're going to see the duty solicitor. So I went into this room, a little room with the glass in the partition that you see through. And this guy said, hi, my name's Robert Smith. I'm your duty solicitor. And he said, you've got 3 charges. I said, what? What do you mean 3? He said, you've got 3 charges. He said, the first charge is resisting arrest. I said, what do you mean resist? He said, did you refuse to have your fingerprints taken yesterday? I said, yeah, because I was told I wasn't under arrest. He said, the second charge is, and this is important, you need to remember this bit, sending menacing text messages and emails. And his words to me were, don't worry, I've looked through your texts and there's nothing threatening there. But he said the third charge is a bit more serious. I said, well, what's that? He says, 2 years ago, now this is 2020, 2 years ago, you in Dundee City Centre, you threw the chief executive of child abuse charity onto the floor and violently assaulted her. I said, excuse me, say that again? You're charged with serious assault of assaulting this woman. You threw her to the floor and you beat her up, violently beat her up. I said, I've got absolutely no idea what you're talking about. I don't. He said, don't worry. We'll get you to court, I'll get you bail, and then we'll take it from there. Wow. I went back to my cell, and I went to court, and I got bail, and I came back, and the police came in, police said, right, we're keeping your phone. We need that as evidence. And I thought, well, that's good, yeah, because if you take the phone and look at all my emails and all my text messages, I'm an open book. I've got nothing to hide. And this time tomorrow, you'll be phoning me saying, or coming at my door saying, sorry, we made a mistake. That's what I thought. So they let me go, and I had to get a bus pass, a train pass, because I had no money, nothing. Train pass, 400 miles. I got home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And the next morning I went to my doctor's, and I'd said to my doctor, I said, you're going to have to give me something to calm me down. So I got a week's worth of Valium, and I sat there for 7 days in my living room, shocked, waiting, sitting, waiting. I was on my computer waiting for an email or somebody to chat my door and say, there's been a mistake because we've arrested the wrong person. This person's admitted she lied. And then it was just at that time when the pandemic started. So now everything's shut down. So I'm sending emails to this lawyer. I'm saying, listen, can you please talk to me? Can you at least send me some proof of what I've done? Am I allowed to see her statement? Can you give me some guidance on what to do next? I'm too busy. The lockdown, this blah, 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 blah. So then I'm phoning the police. And when I say I'm phoning the police and emailing the police, I'm talking about high up. The head of Scott, David Livingston, the head man, Nicola Sturgeon, Hamza Yusuf, I said, listen, there's been a terrible mistake here. I'm being accused of something I haven't done. Just ignored, totally ignored. A year goes by, nothing. I'm phoning all the newspapers, nothing. And I'm getting really worried. And then a date was set for the court, and I went all the way back up to Scotland, and then the lawyer had COVID, so it was cancelled. Meanwhile, I mean, there's lots of bits I've left out. For example, I had other charities in Scotland, other child abuse charities, Emma, who contacted me, and I met with them. This is before the pandemic. I met with other charity leaders, and they said to me, listen, we want you to know a lot of people in Scotland like you, the work that you do. A lot of people appreciate what you do, and we know you didn't do this. We know what this woman's like, and we're on your side. And I was saying, well, then do something. Tell the police. Go to the police, because nothing's happening my end. Nobody's listening to me. Nobody's contacting me and saying, right, we'll set up an interview. We'll take a statement from you. Nothing. And every time I phoned the lawyer, I would get his receptionist. He's too busy. He'll call you later. Nothing, Emma. Over a year. And then eventually the court date was set. Now, I've not heard from this lawyer. And this is 2 years now. There's no lockdown. People's walking about and on trains and stuff. But I've still heard nothing. The police haven't contacted me, and I've gone, and I've got all these other people. I've got statements from other people one survivor who started his own group, and she had told him, you can't start this group unless you call it after me first, the name of the charity. And just tried to stop this guy starting another group. Members of staff who had been bullied and had false allegations made against them. And I'm saying, have you gone to the police? And people were telling me they had gone to the police. This other group that she had joined, and she was a director of this other group that was under investigation by the police, people involved in that group contacted me to say, listen, I've gone to the police to tell them that we know she set you up because she told us she was going to set you up. I said, why is the police not contacting me then? Nothing. Nothing. So what I did was I said, I've got to take drastic action here. So if you Google Dave Sharp, Falkirk, what I did was I decided I'm going to go to Falkirk because that's where the police who arrested me are stationed. And that's also the town where the lawyer's stationed. I said, I'm going to go there and I'm going to take a sleeping bag and I'm going to stay outside the police station for 5 days and 5 nights. So it's all over the papers. So I goes to the police station. I said, I'm here. I want to speak to you. I want you to speak to me to explain what's happening here. Why am I being ignored? Why have I not had any guidance or been to see any statements or any evidence of any crime that I've committed? And I contacted the lawyer and I said, listen, I'm here. I'm here for a week. Make time. I haven't got time. I said, you can't do this to me. I've not done anything wrong. So I stayed there. On the third day or the fourth day, my phone went, and it was the lawyer. The lawyer said, "I've got some good news for you, Dave." I said, "What's that?" He says, "The Procurator Fiscal has dropped the charges of serious assault." I said, "Of course he has, because it never happened." He says, "But only on the condition that you plead guilty to sending menacing text messages." So I said to him, I said, "When you say sending menacing text messages, remember what you said when I first met you, that none of the messages were threatening. So can you tell me what messages that I've sent are criminal? So in other words, what am I actually charged with as a crime?" "I haven't got time, we'll go over that." That was it.
Wow.
So so I'm asking him again and again and again. Now I've got the date for the court case, and I'm saying to him, he's saying to me, he kept on saying, "Just plead guilty, Dave. You'll get a slap on the wrist." I said, "Hang on a minute. It's took me 30 years to turn my life around. I've now got a clean slate. I don't have a criminal record because I don't deserve a criminal record. I've not committed any crimes here." "Well, I can't talk about it. I'm too busy." Uh, what we'll do, Emma, is in the second episode we'll start talking about what happened when I went to court and how I became the first person in Scotland to be sent to prison without ever being interviewed by the police or a lawyer, and then what happened in prison, and then we'll close. So Emma, yeah, leading up to the court case, in the next episode we'll talk about how I became the first and only person to be sent to prison without ever being interviewed by the police or a lawyer, and how I ended up in prison and I ended up trying to take my own life. And I want to talk about what it's like now being on suicide watch and how everything in my life has came to this, and where we have to get justice, where we know this is going on, and together we need to stop this. So thanks very much, Emma, and see you in the second episode.
It is an honor, Dave. Your story is just so jam-packed, and I'm really grateful that you've agreed to come on for more than one episode because I know this episode, people could go listen to 5 times, and still pick out new things. My mind's just kind of blown, like absorbing everything that you said, and there's still I guarantee we'll get more questions about your childhood, or maybe there'll be some things that later on we decide that we want to dive more into. You just have so much in your story that I think is valuable for survivors, for parents, for advocates, and to just expose this in your country. I can't believe that all of this has been happening for all these decades and nobody has stopped it. And I can see why people are really grateful that you have taken that initiative and that you have
Mm-hmm.
stepped up. And I'm sure all those survivors that you've connected with, I'm sure you've made such an impact in that community and that you have so many people that are thankful that you're speaking out when they can't.
Yeah.
Also, thank you with all my heart for all the work that you're doing. And I know that you have some projects too that you've been working on, and I want to talk more about SAFE next time too. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's awesome that you created that, and we need more safe spaces for survivors. So I'd like to talk more about your work too that you do personally, and dive more into your story. But I just want to thank you for all this work. I know it's been so difficult
I'm exhausted.
emotionally and on your
Yeah.
well-being and reputation. Like you've risked so much to speak up for people and
Yeah.
you're a hero. So just thank you for all my heart, with all my heart, for sharing and for coming on and for giving all of this information and for sharing about SRA and the different abuses that occurred and who was involved, and just for laying out the landscape of like how big this problem is.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's huge. It's huge. And the exercise, the object of the exercise for these people is to make you, to minimize you to the point where you think you're the only one it's happening to.
Yes. Right. Yeah. They don't want survivors coming together. They want you
Yeah,
all isolated and,
yeah,
and addicted to drugs and
yeah,
homeless. And
yeah.
they don't want you guys being credible and getting validation and going on podcasts and connecting.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
everything that you're doing is just so important, Dave. And I look forward to seeing your journey unfold. I feel like you're just getting started. So thank you so much for
Oh,
coming.
yeah.
And you're on Twitter. Do you want to just give your Twitter handle so people can go follow you too?
It's at Dave Sharp, DAVESHARP 59. Dave Sharp 59.
And do you have a website or anything up, or is this the best place that people can connect with you?
That's all I do. I only do Twitter. I don't do anything else.
And on
I've
here,
not got the I've not got the intelligence.
yes, you do. You're so smart. But you also have your email on your Twitter, so people can connect with you on Twitter, or they can copy and paste your email and reach out that way too.
Yeah,
So I encourage you guys to go connect with Dave. Go, provide your puzzle pieces or, just reach out for support, share the information that he shares on his page. That's the easiest and best way that we can support survivors and, help get this information out. So again, Dave, thank you so much for coming on and thank all of you guys for listening. We couldn't do this without you. God bless you all, and we will see you next time.